Hello everyone. Welcome to the channel. Before we dive into the horror, I know many of you watch these stories to fall asleep. So, before you drift off, I'd like to ask for your support by subscribing to the channel. Your subscription is very important to us, so please subscribe to help us out. Also, it would be great if you could leave a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. We'd love to know where our stories are reaching. Hit the like button, get comfortable, and let's begin.
The harsh fluorescent light of the bathroom flickered, casting an unflattering glow on my reflection. I stood there, naked and vulnerable, my eyes tracing every curve and bulge of my body. The mirror seemed to magnify every imperfection, every stretch mark, every roll of fat that I tried so desperately to hide. God, I hate you, I whispered to my reflection, my voice cracking with emotion. I hate what you've become. Tears welled up in my eyes, blurring my vision. I blinked rapidly, sending them cascading down my cheeks. I couldn't bear to look anymore, but I couldn't tear my gaze away either. This was my punishment, my daily ritual of self-loathing. My hand reached out, touching the cold surface of the mirror. For a moment, I imagined I could push through it, step into another world where I was thin, beautiful, and confident. But reality crashed back as my fingertips met unyielding glass. A sob escaped my lips, echoing in the small bathroom. I can't do this anymore, I choked out. I can't live like this. The weight of my desperation pressed down on me, suffocating. I tried everything: diets, exercise programs, support groups. Nothing worked. Nothing lasted. I always ended up here, staring at a body I couldn't stand, feeling like a failure. My phone pinged, the sound jarring in the quiet bathroom. I grabbed it, grateful for the distraction. It was an ad, one of those targeted ones that always seemed to know exactly what you were thinking. Tired of failed diets? Sick of the gym? Try Miracle Thin, the revolutionary new diet pill that melts away fat while you sleep. I snorted, ready to swipe it away, but something made me pause. The before and after photos were striking. The testimonials seemed genuine. And God, I was desperate. No, I said aloud, shaking my head. It's probably just another scam. But my finger hovered over the link. What if it wasn't? What if this was the answer I'd been searching for? I clicked. The website was slick, professional. It talked about a breakthrough formula, clinically tested, guaranteed results. My heart raced as I read, hope blooming in my chest for the first time in years. This is it? I whispered, a smile tugging at my lips. This is going to change everything. Before I could second-guess myself, I entered my credit card information and placed an order. As soon as I hit confirm, a wave of excitement washed over me. This was the first day of my new life. The next few days were torture. I checked the mailbox obsessively, jumping every time my phone buzzed with a notification. When the package finally arrived, my hands shook as I tore it open. The bottle was small, innocuous. White pills nestled inside, each one a promise of a better future. I held it up to the light, examining it from every angle. "You're my salvation," I murmured, cradling the bottle to my chest. I carried it to the kitchen, setting it on the counter as I filled a glass with water. This was it, the moment of truth. I twisted off the cap, the click of the safety seal breaking sounding like a gunshot in the quiet room. One pill rolled into my palm. It was smaller than I expected, hardly bigger than a baby aspirin. How could something so tiny change my life so dramatically? "Here goes nothing," I said, raising the pill to my lips. "Wait." I jumped at the sound of my roommate's voice. Sarah stood in the doorway, her eyes wide as she took in the scene. Are those diet pills?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. I nodded, unable to speak. Sarah crossed the room in quick strides, reaching for the bottle. "Tyler, you can't. These things are dangerous." Remember what happened to Lisa in college? I did remember. Lisa had been hospitalized after taking some sketchy weight loss supplements. But this was different. This was FDA approved. This was safe. It's not like that, I insisted, clutching the bottle to my chest. I've done my research. This is legit. Sarah's face softened. I know you're unhappy, Ty, but this isn't the answer. Why don't we go for a run together? Or I could help you meal prep. No, I shouted, surprising us both with the vehemence in my voice. No, I repeated softer this time. I'm tired of running in salads and feeling like crap. I need this, Sarah. Please understand. She stared at me for a long moment, conflict clear in her eyes. Finally, she sighed. I can't stop you, but please be careful, and promise me you'll tell me if anything feels off. Okay? I nodded, relief flooding through me. I promise. Sarah left the kitchen, her shoulders slumped in defeat. I turned back to the pill in my hand. Without giving myself time to reconsider, I popped it into my mouth and washed it down with a gulp of water. It was done. There was no going back now. The next morning, I practically leaped out of bed to check the scale. I held my breath as the numbers flickered, then stabilized. 2 pounds down. Holy shit, I breathed, staring at the display in disbelief. I stepped off and on again. Sure, it must be a mistake, but the number remained the same. Elation surged through me. It was working. It was really working. I rushed to get ready for work, my movements fueled by a newfound energy. As I buttoned up my shirt, I could have sworn it felt a little looser. At the office, I couldn't stop smiling. My coworker, Jin, noticed as we grabbed coffee in the break room. Someone's in a good mood, he commented, raising an eyebrow. Hot date last night? I laughed, shaking my head. Nah, just feeling good. Well, it suits you, Jim said with a grin. You're practically glowing. His words sent a thrill through me. Was I already starting to look different? The days flew by in a blur of excitement and anticipation. Each morning brought a new victory on the scale. My clothes started to hang loose, and the compliments began rolling in. Have you lost weight? My boss asked during a meeting. You look amazing, gushed the barista at my favorite coffee shop. Even Sarah, despite her initial reservations, couldn't deny the results. I have to admit, you do look happier, she said one evening as we watched TV. And healthier. Maybe I was wrong about those pills. I beamed at her, basking in the validation. They're miracle workers, I said. I feel like a whole new person. As the first week drew to a close, I stood once again in front of the bathroom mirror. But this time, instead of disgust and despair, I felt a surge of pride and hope. The person staring back at me was still far from perfect, but I could see the changes. My face looked slimmer, my stomach flatter. I turned to the side, admiring my profile. You're doing it, I told my reflection, grinning widely. You're really doing it. I snapped a quick before and after photo, posting it to my social media with shaking hands. Within minutes, the likes and comments started pouring in. OMG, what's your secret? You look incredible. Serious body goals right here. I read each comment with growing excitement. This was everything I'd ever wanted: to be noticed, to be admired, to feel confident in my own skin. As I got ready for bed that night, I held the bottle of pills reverently. Thank you, I whispered, pressing a kiss to the smooth plastic surface. I fell asleep with a smile on my face, dreaming of the new life that was now within my grasp. In my euphoria, I ignored the slight twinge in my stomach, the metallic taste in my mouth. After all, change didn't come without a little discomfort, right? And this change, this was worth any price. Little did I know, as I drifted off into contented slumber, just how steep that price would be. The invitation to my 10-year high school reunion had been sitting on my dresser for months, a constant reminder of the person I used to be. I'd almost thrown it away a dozen times, but something always stopped me. Now, as I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my bedroom, I was glad I kept it. "Holy shit," I whispered, turning to see my profile. "Is that really me?" The person staring back at me was a far cry from the overweight, insecure teenager who'd walked the halls of Westfield High. 6 weeks of miracle-thin pills had transformed me. I ran my hands down my sides, marveling at the smooth contours where rolls of fat used to be. "Tyler," Sarah's voice called from the living room. "We're going to be late if you don't hurry up." I took a deep breath, smoothing down my new dress, a size I hadn't worn since freshman year of college. "Coming," I called back, giving myself one last approving look before heading out. Sarah's jaw dropped when she saw me. "Wow," she breathed. "Tyler, you look incredible." I twirled, letting out a girlish giggle that surprised even me. "You think so?" Sarah nodded, her eyes wide. "I knew the pills were working. This is amazing." She paused, a flicker of concern crossing her face. "You're feeling okay, right? No side effects?" I waved away her worry. "Never better," I assured her, ignoring the slight burning sensation in my stomach. It had been there for a few days now, but I chalked it up to my body adjusting to its rapid weight loss. "Come on. Let's go show these losers what they've been missing." The reunion was being held in the school gymnasium, now transformed with twinkling lights and gossamer streamers. As we walked in, I felt a surge of confidence I'd never experienced before. Heads turned, conversations paused, and I reveled in every shocked expression. "Tyler?" Tyler Matthews, a tall, handsome man approached, his brow furrowed in confusion. It took me a moment to recognize him. Jason Cooper, former star quarterback and the object of my hopeless crush for 4 long years. "Hi, Jason," I said, flashing him a dazzling smile. "Long time no see." His eyes roamed over me, lingering in a way that sent shivers down my spine. "You look different," he said, clearly struggling to reconcile the person in front of him with his memories. I laughed, the sound light and carefree. Amazing what a decade can do, right? As we chatted, more former classmates approached, each reaction feeding my growing ego. People who'd never given me a second glance in high school were now hanging on my every word, competing for my attention. "I need a drink," I announced after what felt like hours of conversation. "Anyone want to join me at the bar?" A chorus of agreement followed me as I made my way across the room. The burning in my stomach had intensified, but I ignored it, riding high on the waves of admiration and envy surrounding me. "So, what's your secret?" Melissa, former head cheerleader and now a suburban mom of 3, asked as we waited for our drinks. "Has an eye Trina? Plastic surgery?" I smirked, enjoying the barely concealed jealousy in her voice. "Just clean living and positive thinking," I lied smoothly. There was no way I was sharing my miracle cure with anyone here. As the night wore on, I found myself on the dance floor, moving with an energy and grace I'd never possessed before. The music pulsed through me, drowning out the increasing discomfort in my abdomen. "You've got some moves, Matthews," Jason shouted over the music, his body close to mine. I grinned up at him, years of unrequited longing bubbling to the surface. "You ain't seen nothing yet, Cooper." We danced for what felt like hours, my body electric with the joy of movement and the thrill of attention. As the DJ announced the last song, Jason leaned in close. "Want to get some air?" he asked, his breath hot against my ear. My heart raced as I nodded, allowing him to lead me out to the school's courtyard. The cold night air was a relief after the stuffy gymnasium, and I took a deep breath, wincing slightly at the sharp pain it caused. "You okay?" Jason asked, noticing my discomfort. I forced a smile. Just needed some fresh air. It's pretty intense in there. He nodded, stepping closer. You know, I always regretted never asking you out in high school, he said, his voice low and intimate. I raised an eyebrow, skepticism warring with desire. Oh, really? You barely knew I existed back then. Jason had the grace to look sheepish. I was an idiot, he admitted, but I've grown up a lot since then. And seeing you tonight, God, Tyler, you're stunning. Before I could respond, he leaned in and kissed me. It was everything I'd ever dreamed of. Passionate, intense, the culmination of years of fantasy. I melted into it, ignoring the warning signals my body was sending. When we finally broke apart, I was breathless, and not entirely from the kiss. The pain in my stomach had sharpened, and I felt slightly dizzy. That was, Jason began, but I cut him off. I need to use the restroom, I said quickly. I'll be right back. I hurried to the nearest bathroom, locking myself in a stall just as a wave of nausea hit me. I retched, bringing up nothing but bile that burned my throat. Jetted together, I muttered to myself, wiping my mouth with trembling hands. You're not going to let a little stomach bug ruin this night. I splashed some water on my face and reapplied my lipstick, determined to push through whatever this was. When I returned to the courtyard, Jason was waiting with a concerned expression. Everything all right? He asked. I nodded, plastering on a smile. Perfect. Now, where were we? The rest of the night passed in a blur of dancing, laughter, and stolen kisses. By the time Sarah and I stumbled home in the early hours of the morning, I was exhausted but elated. That was amazing. I gushed as we kicked off our shoes. Did you see everyone's faces? They couldn't believe it was me. Sarah smiled, but there was a hint of worry in her eyes. It was pretty spectacular, she agreed. But Tyler, are you sure you're feeling okay? You looked a bit pale towards the end there. I waved off her concern. Just tired, I assured her. And maybe a little too much champagne. Nothing a good night's sleep won't fix. But as I lay in bed that night, sleep eluded me. The pain in my stomach had settled into a constant, gnawing ache, and my mind raced with the events of the evening. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, but I pushed it aside, focusing instead on the triumph I'd experienced. The next morning, I woke to a flurry of notifications on my phone. Friend requests, messages, and tags and photos from the reunion flooded my social media. I scrolled through them, grinning at the flattering comments and envious reactions. Ignoring the persistent discomfort in my abdomen, I got up and headed to my closet. It was time for a new wardrobe to match my new body. As I dressed in my now loose clothing, I made a mental note to pick up some antacids at the pharmacy. A little indigestion was a small price to pay for the life I'd always dreamed of. Little did I know, as I stepped out into the bright morning sun, ready to conquer the world, that the price would soon become far steeper than I could have ever imagined. The bliss of my transformation was about to give way to a nightmare beyond my wildest fears. But for now, I was riding high on a wave of confidence and admiration, blind to the danger lurking within my own body. The world was mine for the taking, and I was determined to seize every opportunity with both hands, no matter the cost. The shrill beep of my alarm clock pierced through the fog of sleep, jolting me awake. I groaned, reaching out to silence the offending noise. As I stretched, a sharp, stabbing pain in my abdomen made me gasp. What the hell? I muttered, sitting up slowly. The pain subsided to a dull ache, and I took a deep breath. It was probably just indigestion from the celebratory dinner I'd had last night. After all, I wasn't used to rich foods anymore, not since I'd started the Miracle Thin pills. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, admiring how they no longer dimpled with cellulite. Despite the discomfort, I couldn't help but smile. The trade-off was worth it. In the bathroom, I went through my morning routine, pointedly avoiding the scale. I'd promised myself I'd only weigh in once a week now, not wanting to become obsessive. As I brushed my teeth, I noticed a slight metallic taste in my mouth. Frowning, I spat into the sink. Was that a hint of pink in the foam? You're imagining things? I told my reflection sternly. Stop looking for problems where there aren't any. At work, I basked in the continued attention from my colleagues. It had been weeks since the high school reunion, but people were still commenting on my transformation. "Tyler, you're practically wasting away," exclaimed Janice from accounting as we waited for the elevator. "What's your secret?" I gave her a conspiratorial wink. "If I told you, I'd have to kill you." We both laughed as we stepped into the elevator, but the sudden movement sent a wave of nausea through me. I gripped the handrail, trying to steady myself. "Are you okay?" Janice asked, concern etching her features. "You've gone quite pale." I forced a smile. "Just a bit of motion sickness. I'm fine." But as the morning wore on, it became clear that I was far from fine. The pain in my stomach intensified, coming in waves that left me breathless. By lunchtime, I was doubled over at my desk, cold sweat beading on my forehead. A gentle hand on my shoulder made me look up. It was Jim, my cubicle neighbor, his face creased with worry. "Tyler, you look awful," he said bluntly. "I think you should go home." I tried to protest, but another wave of pain hit me, and I couldn't suppress a whimper. Jim's expression hardened. "Dance it. I'm calling you a cab." 20 minutes later, I was stumbling through my front door, barely making it to the bathroom before violently emptying the contents of my stomach. As I slumped against the cold porcelain, I caught sight of something that made my blood run cold. There, in the toilet bowl, swirling among the sick, were unmistakable streaks of blood. "Oh God!" I whispered, panic rising in my chest. "Oh God! Oh God! Oh God!" With trembling hands, I reached for my phone and dialed the local clinic. The receptionist's cheerful voice grated on my frayed nerves. "West Side Medical. How may I help you?" "I need to see a doctor," I said, my voice shaking. "It's urgent." An hour later, I was sitting on an examination table, trying not to fidget as Dr. Patel reviewed my chart. She was a small woman with kind eyes, but her furrowed brow did nothing to ease my anxiety. "So, Mr. Matthews," she began, looking up from her tablet, "you've been experiencing abdominal pain and vomiting blood?" I nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, and there's this constant burning sensation in my stomach." "I see." She made a note. "And have you made any significant changes to your diet or lifestyle recently?" I hesitated. Should I tell her about the pills? But no, they were FDA approved. They couldn't be the cause of this. "I've lost some weight," I said finally. "Been eating healthier, exercising more." Dr. Patel hummed non-committally. "Well, let's take a look, shall we?" Her examination was thorough, her fingers probing gently but firmly across my abdomen. I couldn't suppress a gasp of pain when she hit a particularly tender spot. "Sorry about that," she murmured. "Mr. Matthews, I'm going to order some blood tests and an ultrasound. I'd like to rule out any serious conditions." The next few hours passed in a blur of needles, machines, and anxious waiting. By the time Dr. Patel called me back into her office, I was a bundle of raw nerves. She sat behind her desk, a puzzled expression on her face as she looked over my test results. The silence stretched on, each second ratcheting up my anxiety. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "What is it? What's wrong with me?" Dr. Patel looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of concern and confusion. "Mr. Matthews, your test results are unusual. Your liver enzymes are elevated, and the ultrasound shows some anomalies in your digestive tract." "What does that mean?" I asked, my mouth dry. She leaned forward, her voice gentle. It means we need to do more tests. These results are consistent with some form of internal corrosion, but I've never seen anything quite like this before. The word corrosion echoed in my head, drowning out the rest of her explanation. Corrosion, like I was rusting from the inside out. I'd like to admit you to the hospital for observation, Dr. Patel was saying. We need to... No, I interrupted, standing up abruptly. The room spun, but I steadied myself against the desk. No, I can't. I have work. I have... Mr. Matthews, Tyler. Dr. Patel's voice was firm but kind. This is serious. We need to find out what's causing this before it gets worse. But I wasn't listening. All I could think about was the bottle of pills sitting on my nightstand at home. This couldn't be happening. Not now, not when I was finally becoming the person I'd always wanted to be. I need to go, I muttered, stumbling towards the door. I'll come back tomorrow. I just need some time to think. Dr. Patel called after me, but I was already halfway down the hallway, my heart pounding in my ears. I burst out of the clinic into the fading afternoon light, gulping in deep breaths of air. As I fumbled for my phone to call a ride, a wave of dizziness washed over me. I staggered, my vision blurring. The last thing I remember is the feeling of rough concrete against my cheek and the sound of alarmed voices growing fainter as darkness closed in. When I came to, I was lying in a hospital bed, the steady beep of a heart monitor filling the room. Sarah sat beside me, her face pale and drawn. Tyler? She said, noticing my open eyes. Oh, thank God. How are you feeling? I tried to speak, but my throat was dry and raw. Sarah quickly held a cup of water to my lips, and I sipped gratefully. What happened? I croaked. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. You collapsed outside the clinic. They brought you here. Tyler, why didn't you tell me you were sick? The memory of Dr. Patel's words came flooding back, along with a fresh wave of panic. The pills, I whispered. Sarah, it's the pills. They're doing something to me. Her brow furrowed in confusion. What pills? The diet pills? But they're supposed to be safe. Before I could respond, a doctor entered the room, his face grave. Mr. Matthews, I'm Dr. Reeves. We've been running some tests while you were unconscious, and, well, I'm afraid I have some disturbing news. As he spoke, detailing the bizarre and frightening changes happening inside my body, I felt a cold dread settle over me. The miracle cure I'd been so desperate for was turning out to be a nightmare beyond imagination. The blissful high of my transformation was crashing down around me, leaving only fear and regret in its wake. As Dr. Reeves continued his explanation, I closed my eyes, wishing I could go back to that moment in front of the mirror, when I'd made the decision that had set all of this in motion. But there was no going back now. The pills I'd thought would save me were eating me alive, and I was terrified of what the coming days would bring. The soft glow of my laptop screen illuminated the dark hospital room, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The steady beep of the heart monitor provided a rhythmic backdrop to the frantic tapping of my fingers on the keyboard. I'd been at it for hours, searching for answers, for hope, for anything that could explain what was happening to me. Miracle Fin side effects. I typed into the search bar, my hands shaking slightly. The results loaded, and my heart sank. Hundreds of forum posts, news articles, and medical reports filled the screen. I clicked on the first link, a support group for Miracle Thin victims. As I scrolled through the posts, my blood ran cold. The stories were horrifyingly familiar. Rapid weight loss followed by excruciating pain, internal bleeding, organ failure. Some had survived, left with lifelong health issues. Others, I quickly closed that thread, unable to face the grim reality it presented. This can't be happening, I whispered to myself, running a hand through my thinning hair. Another side effect I'd been trying to ignore. A soft knock at the door made me jump. Sarah peeked in, her face etched with concern. "Tyler, you're still awake?" she asked, stepping into the room. Her eyes fell on the laptop screen, and her expression darkened. "Ol hat, D, you shouldn't be looking at that stuff. You need to rest." I shook my head vehemently. "I need answers, Sarah. The doctors don't know what's going on. Maybe someone out there has found a cure." Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, gently closing the laptop. "The doctors are doing everything they can," Dr. Reeves said. "Dr. Reeves doesn't know shit." I snapped, immediately regretting my outburst when I saw Sarah flinch. "I'm sorry. I'm scared, Sada." She took my hand, squeezing it gently. "I know, we all are, but we're gonna figure this out, okay? You're not alone in this." As if on cue, another wave of pain ripped through my abdomen. "De gasped, doubling of it." Sarah quickly pressed the call button, her voice rising in panic as she called for a nurse. The next few hours passed in a haze of pain medication and fitful sleep. When I finally regained full consciousness, sunlight was streaming through the windows, and I had made a decision. "I need to call them," I said as soon as Sarah entered the room with a cup of coffee. She frowned, setting the cup down. "Can't Miracle Thin, the company, they need to know what their product is doing to people. They need to stop it." Sarah's frown deepened. "Tyler, I don't think that's a good idea. We should wait for the lawyers to." But I was already reaching for my phone. With trembling fingers, I dialed the customer service number I'd memorized weeks ago, when Miracle Fin had been my salvation rather than my destruction. A cheerful voice answered on the third ring. "Thank you for calling Miracle Fin, where miracles happen every day. This is Jessica. How may I assist you?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "My name is Tyler Matthews. I've been taking your pills for 2 months, and they're killing me. I need to speak to someone in charge." Now, there was a pause. Then Jessica's voice returned, noticeably less cheerful. "I'm sorry, sir, but I'm not authorized to." "Listen to me," I interrupted, my voice rising. "Your pills are corroding my insides. I'm in the hospital. There are others like me. You need to recall this product before more people get hurt. Sir, I understand you're upset, but I assure you that Miracle Fin has passed all necessary safety regulations. If you're experiencing any discomfort, we recommend you discontinue use and consult your physician. Now, is there anything else I can help you with today?" The rehearsed response sent a surge of rage through me. "Discomfort? I'm dying. Don't you understand? You can't just..." And click, followed by a dial tone. They'd hung up on me. "Bastards!" I yelled, hurling the phone across the room. It hit the wall with a crack, pieces of plastic scattering across the floor. Sarah rushed to my side, her eyes wide with alarm. "Tyler, calm down. Your blood pressure..." But I couldn't calm down. The pain, the fear, the anger, it all came crashing down at once. I broke down, sobs racking my body as Sarah held me, murmuring soothing words I couldn't quite make out. When I finally regained my composure, a grim determination had settled over me. I gently pushed Sarah away, wiping my eyes. "I need my laptop," I said, my voice hoarse but steady. Sarah hesitated. "Tyler, I don't think..." "Please, Sarah, I need to do this." With a resigned sigh, she handed me the laptop. I opened it, navigating to my email. "If they won't listen, I'll make them listen. I'm going to tell everyone what these pills are doing." For the next hour, I typed furiously, pouring out my story in excruciating detail. I attached photos of my medical charts, screenshots of my research. When I was done, I had emails ready to send to every news outlet, health organization, and government agency I could think of. My finger hovered over the send Button. Was I really ready for this? To become the face of the scandal, to give up any hope of privacy. A particularly sharp pain lanced through my stomach, making the decision for me. I clicked send on every email, then sat back, exhausted but oddly relieved. It's done, I told Sarah, who had been watching me with a mixture of concern and admiration. Now we wait. We didn't have to wait long. By that evening, my phone, hastily repaired by a sympathetic nurse, was buzzing constantly with calls from reporters, lawyers, and other victims who had seen my story starting to circulate online. Dr. Reeves entered the room, his face grave. Mr. Matthews, I've just gotten off the phone with a colleague at the FDA. They're launching an investigation into Miracle Fin based on your report and several others that have come in. Bunt, he paused, his expression softening with sympathy. I'm afraid it may be too late to undo the damage in your case. The words hit me like a physical blow. What are you saying? I asked, though I already knew the answer. The corrosion is spreading faster than we anticipated. We need to consider more aggressive treatment options. There's an experimental procedure. But I was no longer listening. My gaze had drifted to the window, where I could see the sun setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Was this to be one of my last sunsets? Tyler, Sarah's voice broke through my reverie. Tyler, did you hear what the doctor said? There's still hope. I turned back to them, seeing the desperation in their eyes. They wanted me to fight, to cling to any shred of hope. But I was so tired. The constant pain, the fear, the guilt. It was all too much. I need some time to think, I said quietly. 10? Can I have a moment alone? They exchanged worried glances but nodded. As they left the room, I could hear them whispering in the hallway, no doubt discussing my fate. Alone, I turned my attention back to the window. The sky had darkened now, the first stars becoming visible. I thought about all the people out there, going about their lives, unaware of the battle raging inside my body. How many of them were taking Miracle Fin right now, believing it would change their lives for the better? My gaze fell on the small orange bottle on my bedside table. My last remaining pills. I had insisted on keeping them, despite the doctor's protests, clinging to them like a security blanket. With a sudden, decisive movement, I grabbed the bottle and stumbled to the bathroom. My hands shook as I twisted off the cap, watching as the small white pills clattered into the toilet bowl. Never again, I whispered, my voice breaking. Never again. I flushed, watching as the instruments of my destruction swirled away. As I turned to head back to bed, a wave of dizziness washed over me. The room spun, and I felt my legs give way beneath me. The last thing I remember is the cold tile against my cheek and the distant sound of alarms blaring. As consciousness slipped away, a single thought echoed in my mind. What have I done to myself? The rhythmic beeping of medical equipment filled the air as I slowly regained consciousness. My eyelids felt heavy, but I forced them open, blinking against the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room. Dr. Reeves stood at the foot of my bed, his face a mask of professional concern as he studied a chart. "Welcome back, Mr. Matthews," he said, noticing I was awake. "You gave us quite a scare." I tried to speak, but my throat was dry and raw. A nurse appeared by my side, offering me a small cup of water with a straw. I sipped gratefully, wincing at the pain in my throat. "What happened?" I managed to croak out. Dr. Reeves's expression grew grave. "You collapsed in the bathroom. We had to perform emergency surgery to stop internal bleeding." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "Mr. Matthews, Tyler, I'm afraid I have some difficult news." My heart began to race, the monitor beside me betraying my rising panic. "What is it?" I whispered, dreading the answer. Dr. Reeves took a deep breath. The damage from the miracle thin pills is more extensive than we initially thought. Your organs, they're dissolving, Tyler. It's unlike anything I've ever seen before. The words hit me like a physical blow. Dissolving. My organs were dissolving. I felt the room start to spin, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "Nurse, get him some oxygen," Dr. Reeves ordered sharply. As the nurse fitted an oxygen mask over my face, he continued, his voice gentler now. "We've contacted some specialists. They're flying in as we speak. We're going to do everything we can, Tyler." I nodded numbly, unable to form words. Dr. Reeves squeezed my shoulder reassuringly before leaving the room, no doubt to confer with his team about my dire situation. Hours passed in a haze of tests, scans, and hushed conversations just outside my door. Finally, a new doctor entered, a tall, stern-looking woman with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. "Mr. Matthews, I'm Dr. Eliza Chan," she introduced herself, her voice clipped and professional. "I specialize in rare metabolic disorders. I'd like to show you something, if you feel up to it." I nodded weakly and Dior. Chun wheeled over a portable screen. She pulled up a series of images, my CT scans, I realized with a jolt. "This," she said, pointing to the first image, "is what a healthy digestive system should look like." She swiped to the next image, and I couldn't suppress a gasp of horror. The organs were misshapen, riddled with what looked like holes. "And this," Dr. Chun continued, her voice softening slightly, "is your current scan." I stared at the image, unable to reconcile it with my own body. How is this possible?" I whispered. Dr. Chen's expression was grim. "The active ingredient in Miracle Fin, a compound called XR714, was originally developed as an experimental solvent for industrial use. It appears that when ingested, it begins to break down organic matter, in this case, your internal organs." The room seemed to tilt around me as the full horror of the situation sank in. "You're saying these pills are eating me from the inside out?" Dr. Chen nodded solemnly. "I'm afraid so. The weight loss you experienced was not fat being burned, but your own body being dissolved." A wave of nausea washed over me, and I barely had time to lean over before I was retching into a bedpan. Dr. Chun waited patiently until I was finished, then handed me a tissue. "I know this is a lot to take in," she said, her professional demeanor cracking slightly to reveal genuine sympathy. "But understanding what we're dealing with is the first step in fighting it." Fighting it. The words sparked a glimmer of hope in the darkness that had enveloped me. "So there's a chance? You can fix this?" Dr. Chan hesitated, and in that moment of silence, I felt my hope begin to crumble. "We're going to try everything we can," she said finally. "But I have to be honest with you, Tyler. The damage is extensive. We're in uncharted territory here." I closed my eyes, fighting back tears. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Without intervention? Weeks, maybe a month." Dr. Chen's voice was gentle but firm. "But we're not giving up. We're going to explore every option, every experimental treatment available." As Dr. Chun continued to explain the battery of treatments they were proposing, my mind drifted. I thought of all the people out there still taking Miracle Thin, blissfully unaware of the ticking time bomb in their bodies. I had to warn them, had to stop this before more lives were destroyed. "I need to make a statement," I interrupted Dr. Chan mid-sentence. "To the press. People need to know what these pills are doing." Dr. Chin frowned. "Mr. Matthews, in your condition, I don't think—" "Trees," I begged. "I might not have much time left. Let me use it to save others." After a moment of consideration, Dr. Chun nodded. "I'll speak with the hospital's PR department in this fight, and maybe, just maybe, some good could come from my suffering." With that thought, I closed my eyes, allowing myself to drift off into a fitful sleep. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new challenges. But for now, I had done what I could. I had told my story. I had sounded the alarm. And in doing so, I had taken the first step towards redemption. The antiseptic smell of the hospital had become a constant companion, as familiar to me now as the scent of my own home. I sat in a wheelchair, staring out the window at the bustling city below, waiting for the orderly to take me to my first chemotherapy session. The irony wasn't lost on me. Fighting to save a body I had so willingly poisoned in pursuit of perfection. A gentle knock on the door frame pulled me from my thoughts. I turned to see Dr. Chun. Her usually stern face softened with what looked like cautious optimism. "Good morning, Tyler," she said, stepping into the room. "Are you ready for today?" I nodded, trying to muster a smile. As ready as I'll ever be, I suppose. Though I have to admit, I never thought I'd be looking forward to pumping more chemicals into my body. Dr. Chen's lips twitched in a small smile. "This is different, Tyler. We're fighting back now." She paused, consulting the tablet in her hands. "I wanted to go over the treatment plan with you one more time before we start." As she explained the cocktail of drugs they would be using, a combination of traditional chemotherapy agents and experimental compounds designed to counteract the effects of XR714, I found my mind wandering. I thought of all the other victims out there, wondering if they were receiving the same level of care, if they even knew yet what was happening to their bodies. "Tyler," Dr. Chen's voice snapped me back to reality. "Did you hear what I said?" I blinked, embarrassed. "I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?" She sighed, but her eyes were understanding. I said, "This isn't going to be easy. The side effects can be severe, but it's our best chance at halting the progression of the damage." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. "I understand. Let's do this." The orderly arrived then, ready to wheel me down to the oncology ward. As we made our way through the sterile corridors, I couldn't help but notice the stares and whispers that followed us. My story had been all over the news for days now, and even here in the hospital I was a minor celebrity, though not for reasons anyone would envy. The chemotherapy room was bright and airy, with large windows overlooking a small garden. Several other patients were already there, hooked up to 4 drips, some reading, others dozing. A nurse greeted us with a warm smile. "Mr. Matthews? I'm Nurse Olivia. I'll be taking care of you today." She helped me settle into a comfortable recliner, then began preparing the 4-line. "First time?" she asked gently. I nodded, suddenly feeling very young and scared. Is it going to hurt?" Olivia's smile was sympathetic. "You might feel a little cold at first, and some patients experience a metallic taste. But we'll be monitoring you closely, and there's medication if you start feeling nauseous." As the first drops of chemotherapy drugs entered my system, I closed my eyes, trying to imagine them as tiny warriors, battling against the destructive force of the miracle-thin pills. The fantasy was short-lived, however, as a wave of nausea washed over me. Hours passed in a haze of discomfort and medication. By the time the session was over, I felt utterly drained, as if every ounce of energy had been leached from my body. As Olivia disconnected the 4, she noticed my pallor. "Rough first round, huh?" she said softly. "It often gets easier as your body adjusts. Try to rest now." Back in my room, I collapsed onto the bed, too exhausted even to change out of my hospital gown. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, Sarah was gently shaking me awake. "Tyler? Pon, wake up. There's someone here to see you." I blinked groggily, my vision slowly focusing on a tall man in an expensive suit standing at the foot of my bed. He had a kind face, but his eyes were sharp and assessing. "Mr. Matthews," he said, stepping forward. "I'm Richard Dawson from Dawson and Associates. I'm the lawyer handling your case against Miracle Finn." I struggled to sit up, Sarah quickly adjusting my pillows to support me. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Dawson," I said, my voice hoarse. "I'm sorry. I'm not at my best right now." Dawson waved away my apology. "No need to apologize. I understand you've just had your first chemotherapy session. How are you feeling?" I managed a weak chuckle, like I've been hit by a truck. "But I'm still here, so I guess that's something." Dawson nodded, his expression turning serious. "Mr. Matthews, Tyler, I wanted to update you on the case. Since your press conference, we've been inundated with calls from other Miracle Thin victims. The class action lawsuit is growing by the day." A mixture of emotions washed over me. Relief that others were coming forward, horror at the scale of the damage, and a grim satisfaction that Miracle Thin would be held accountable. "That's good, I suppose," I said slowly. "How many?" "Over 500 so far," Dawson replied. "And we expect that number to grow. Your bravery in coming forward has given others the courage to speak up." I closed my eyes, overwhelmed. 500 lives, at least, forever altered by a pill that promised miracles and delivered nightmares. "There's something else," Dawson continued, his tone cautious. "Miracle Thin's parent company, New Life Pharmaceuticals, has reached out. They want to settle." My eyes snapped open. "Settle? Already?" Dawson nodded. "They're scared, Tyler. Your story has tanked their stock price, and they're facing investigations from the FDA and the Justice Department. They want this to go away as quickly and quietly as possible." I felt a surge of anger, hot and fierce. "And what about us? The people whose lives they've destroyed? Do they think they can just throw money at this and make it disappear?" "I understand your anger," Dawson said calmly. "But a settlement could mean immediate funds for medical care for all the victims. It could mean holding the company accountable without a lengthy court battle that many of the victims might not survive to see the end of." His words hit home, and I felt the anger drain away, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. "What do you think we should do?" asked. Dawson considered for a moment. "I think we should hear them out. But ultimately, as the lead plaintiff, the decision will be yours, Tyler. Whatever you decide, we'll support you." I nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders. "When?" "They want to meet tomorrow. I know it's soon, and if you're not feeling up to it—" "No," I interrupted. "Tomorrow is fine. I want this over with." After Dawson left, Sarah sat on the edge of my bed, taking my hand in hers. "Are you sure about this, Tyler? You've been through so much already today." I squeezed her hand weakly. "I have to do this, Sarah, for everyone who's suffering because of these pills. I have to see it through." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "You're the bravest person I know, Tyler Matthews." As the day wore on, the side effects of the chemotherapy intensified. I spent most of the night alternating between bouts of nausea and fitful sleep. By morning, I felt hollowed out, as if the drugs had scoured me from the inside. But as I sat in the conference room, facing the team of lawyers and executives from New Life Pharmaceuticals, I found a reserve of strength I didn't know I had. I listened as they outlined their settlement offer, a fund of billions of dollars for victim compensation and medical care, a full recall of Miracle Thin, and a public admission of wrongdoing. When they finished, all eyes turned to me. I took a deep breath, wincing at the pain it caused in my ravaged body. "Your offer is generous," I began, my voice stronger than I expected. "But money can't undo the damage you've caused. Can't give people back the years you've stolen from them." The CEO of New Life, a polished woman in her 50s, leaned forward. "Mr. Matthews, we understand your anger. We're truly sorry for—" "Sorry doesn't cut it," I interrupted. "I want guarantees. I want oversight. I want to make sure nothing like this ever happens again." For the next hour, we negotiated. By the end, we had a deal that included not just financial compensation, but also funding for research into treatments for XR714 damage, independent oversight of New Life's research and development processes, and a commitment to reforming the way diet supplements are tested and marketed. As I signed the agreement, I felt a mix of exhaustion and triumph. It wasn't a perfect solution, nothing could be, given the circumstances, but it was a start, a way to ensure that some good could come from this tragedy. Back in my hospital room, as the adrenaline of the meeting wore off, I felt the full weight of the day's events crash down on me. Sarah found me curled up in bed, silent tears streaming down my face. "Oh, Tyler," she murmured, climbing onto the bed and wrapping her arms around me. "It's okay. You did it. You won." I clung to her, my body shaking with sobs. "Did I?" I whispered. "It doesn't feel like winning. It feels like the beginning of a very long, very hard fight." Sarah stroked my hair gently. "Then we'll fight it together, every step of the way." As I drifted off to sleep in Sarah's arms, I thought about the battle ahead, the chemotherapy, the long road to recovery, the challenge of rebuilding a life and a body forever changed by miracle thin. It would be hard, perhaps the hardest thing I'd ever done. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a glimmer of hope. I had taken on a pharmaceutical giant and won. I had given a voice to hundreds of victims. I had taken the first step towards redemption. The battle was far from over, but I was ready to fight. The morning sun filtered through the hospital room's blinds, casting striped shadows across my gaunt face. I stared at my reflection in the small mirror Sarah had brought me, barely recognizing the person looking back. My once full cheeks were sunken, dark circles underlined my eyes, and clumps of hair lay scattered on my pillow, casualties of the aggressive chemotherapy. A soft knock at the door interrupted my self-scrutiny. "Come in," I called, my voice raspy from disuse. The door creaked open, and to my surprise, Jason stepped in. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't seen him since the high school reunion, since before. Everything. "Tyler?" he said hesitantly, his eyes widening as he took in my appearance. Wow, I hardly recognized you." I attempted a smile, but it felt more like a grimace. "Yeah, the chemo chic look isn't quite as flattering as I'd hoped." Jason chuckled nervously, taking a few steps closer. "I've been following your story in the news. I can't believe what you've been through. I wanted to come sooner. But you were scared." I finished for him. It wasn't a question. He nodded, shame coloring his cheeks. "I'm sorry, Dianed. I should have been here for you." I shrugged, wincing at the movement. "It's okay. Not everyone can handle this." I gestured vaguely at my frail body. Jason moved closer, reaching out as if to take my hand, but then seemed to think better of it. "How are you feeling?" "Really?" I considered lying, putting on a brave face, but I was too tired for pretenses. "Honestly, terrible. The chemo it's brutal. Some days I wonder if the cure is worse than the disease." Jason's face crumpled with sympathy. "God, Tyler, I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do?" I was about to reply when a wave of nausea hit me. I lurched for the bedpan, retching violently. When I looked up, panting and wiping my mouth, I saw Jason had recoiled, his face a mask of horror and disgust. I should go," he stammered, already backing towards the door. "I'm sorry, I can't. I'll call you, okay?" Before I could respond, he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him. I slumped back against my pillows, a mixture of hurt and anger churning in my gut alongside the nausea. "Coward," I whispered to the empty room, tears stinging my eyes. Hours passed in a haze of pain and self-pity. The nurses came and went, adjusting my checking my vitals, their faces blending into a parade of professional concern. It wasn't until late afternoon that something broke through my fog of misery. My phone, which had been silent for days, suddenly lit up with a notification. An email from an address I didn't recognize. Curiosity piqued. I opened it. Dear Mr. Matthews, my name is Dr. Amelia Winters. I was a research scientist at New Life Pharmaceuticals until 2 weeks ago. I've been following your case closely, and I can no longer stay silent. There's information about Miracle Thin and XR 714 that hasn't come to light yet, information that could be crucial to your treatment and to holding New Life truly accountable. I want to help, but I'm taking a huge risk in contacting you. New Life's lawyers made me sign ironclad NDAs when I left. If they find out I'm talking to you, I could lose everything. If you're willing to hear me out, I can meet you at the hospital tomorrow. Let me know. Dr. Winters. My heart raced as I read and reread the email. A whistleblower from New Life? This could change everything. With shaking hands, I typed out a reply, agreeing to meet. The next day dawned with a newfound sense of purpose. For the first time in weeks, I insisted on getting dressed in real clothes instead of a hospital gown. Sarah helped me into a comfortable sweater and sweatpants, her eyes shining with hope at seeing me so animated. Are you sure about this? She asked as she helped me into a wheelchair. We don't know anything about this woman. What if it's a trap? I squeezed her hand reassuringly. It's a risk we have to take. If there's any chance she has information that could help, I have to hear her out. We wheeled down to a small meeting room in the hospital's administrative wing. Dr. Chun was already there, along with Richard Dawson, my lawyer. We had agreed it was best to have them present for the meeting. At precisely 2 p.m., there was a knock at the door. A petite woman with short gray hair and sharp, intelligent eyes entered. She looked nervous but determined. Dr. Winters? Asked. She nodded, taking a seat across from me. Mr. Matthews, thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I know you're taking a risk too. I leaned forward, ignoring the twinge of pain the movement caused. You said you have information about Miracle Thin. What kind of information? Dr. Winters took a deep breath. New Life knew. They knew about the side effects of XR 714 long before Miracle Thin went to market. They had data from animal trials showing organ deterioration, but they buried it. They pushed forward with human trials anyway, using less than ethical methods to hide the negative results. The room fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. It was Dawson who spoke first, his voice tight with controlled anger. Do you have proof of these claims, Dr. Winters? She nodded, pulling a flash drive from her pocket. Everything's here. Lab reports, internal memos, emails. It's all heavily encrypted, of course. I couldn't risk New Life tracking it. As Dawson took the flash drive, his eyes gleaming with the promise of damning evidence, I felt a surge of vindication. But it was quickly tempered by a more pressing concern. What about treatment? I asked, my voice urgent. Is there anything in there that could help us fight this? Dr. Winters' expression softened. There might be. In the later stages of research, we were working on a compound that showed promise in reversing some of the damage caused by XR 714. It never made it to human trials. New Life shut down the project when they realized it might implicate them in wrongdoing. But the data is all there. In the right hands, it could be the key to developing an effective treatment. Tulp, fragile but persistent, bloomed in my chest. I turned to Dr. Chan, who was already scrolling through the data on her tablet, her brow furrowed in concentration. Could this really help? I asked, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. Dr. Chun looked up, a cautious smile on her face. It's preliminary, but yes, I think it could. This could be the breakthrough we've been looking for. The room erupted in a flurry of activity. Dawson was on the phone with his team, preparing to incorporate this new evidence into our case. Dr. Chun was furiously taking notes, already planning out new treatment protocols. Sarah was crying, happy tears this time, squeezing my hand so tight it almost hurt. But amidst the excitement, I noticed Dr. Winters sitting quietly, a look of mingled relief and fear on her face. I wheeled over to her, taking her hand in mine. "Thank you," I said softly. "I know what this must have cost you. We'll make sure you're protected, I promise." She smiled, squeezing my hand gently. It was the right thing to do. I just wish I'd had the courage to do it sooner. As the day wore on, the full impact of Dr. Winter's revelation began to sink in. This wasn't just about my case anymore. It was about exposing a level of corporate greed and negligence that went beyond anything we'd imagined. It was about potentially saving the lives of hundreds, maybe thousands of people who had fallen victim to Miracle Thin's false promises. That night, as I lay in my hospital bed, exhausted but too wired to sleep, I thought about the roller coaster of emotions the day had brought. The betrayal of Jason's fair-weather friendship, the hope kindled by Dr. Winter's bravery, the possibility of a cure that had seemed impossible just hours ago. Sarah, who had refused to leave my side, stirred in the chair next to my bed. "You should be sleeping," she murmured, her eyes still closed. I reached out, taking her hand. "I know. I just can't stop thinking about everything that happened today. It's a lot to process." She opened her eyes, smiling softly. "I know, but try to rest. Tomorrow's a big day." She was right. Tomorrow, I would start a new, experimental treatment based on Dr. Winter's research. It was risky, untested, with potential side effects we couldn't even begin to predict. But it was also my best chance, maybe my only chance. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I found myself thinking not of the risks, but of the possibilities. For the first time since this nightmare began, I allowed myself to imagine a future, a real future, not just borrowed time. A future where I was healthy, where Miracle Thin was nothing but a cautionary tale, where the sacrifices of people like Dr. Winters had made the world a little bit safer. It was a beautiful dream, and tomorrow we would take the first step towards making it a reality. But as consciousness faded, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered a warning. The battle was far from over. New life wouldn't go down without a fight, and my body, already ravaged by Miracle Thin and weakened by chemotherapy, would be pushed to its limits by this new treatment. The road ahead would be hard, perhaps harder than anything I'd faced so far. But as I teetered on the edge of sleep, I made a silent promise to myself and to all the other victims out there. I would fight. With every ounce of strength I had left, I would fight. For justice, for redemption, for a future free from the shadow of Miracle Thin. Whatever it took, whatever the cost, I would see this through to the end. With that resolve firmly in place, I finally surrendered to sleep, ready to face whatever challenges the new day would bring. The early morning news blared from the small TV in my hospital room, jerking me awake from a fitful sleep. I blinked, disoriented, until the words on the screen came into focus. Breaking news. New Life Pharmaceuticals CEO arrested in Miracle Thin scandal. I fumbled for the remote, turning up the volume as a stern-faced news anchor continued. In a dramatic turn of events, FBI agents arrested Elaine Cho, CEO of New Life Pharmaceuticals, at her home in the early hours of this morning. Cho is facing charges of fraud, negligence, and conspiracy in connection with the Miracle Thin diet pill controversy. This arrest comes in the wake of damning evidence provided by a whistleblower. A surge of emotions washed over me: relief, vindication, and a grim satisfaction that justice was finally being served. I reached for my phone, my fingers shaking as I dialed Sarah's number. "Tyler," Sarah's sleepy voice answered. "What's wrong? Are you okay? Turn on the news," I said, my voice hoarse with excitement. "They've arrested the CEO of New Life. It's happening, Sarah. It's really happening." I heard rustling on the other end of the line, stopped in a gasp as Sarah saw the news. "Oh my God, Tyler. This is huge. How are you feeling?" I paused, taking stock of my body. The experimental treatment based on Dr. Winter's research had been grueling, with side effects that rivaled even the worst of my chemotherapy days. But today, for the first time in weeks, I felt different. Not better exactly, but not worse either. "I'm okay," I said, surprising myself with the realization. "Actually, I think I might be a little better today." Sarah's relief was palpable even through the phone. "That's wonderful, Tyler. I'll be there soon. Okay? We can celebrate together." As I waited for Sarah to arrive, my phone buzzed with messages and calls from other Miracle Thin victims. The arrest of Elaine Cho had galvanized our community, sparking hope and a renewed sense of purpose. One message, from a woman named Maria whose story had become intertwined with mine through our shared struggle, caught my eye. "Tyler, have you seen the news?" I can't stop crying. For the first time since this nightmare began, I feel like we might actually win this fight. "Thank you for giving us a voice. You're our hero." I stared at the message, a lump forming in my throat. Hero. The word felt foreign, undeserved. I was just a guy who'd made a terrible mistake and was trying to make it right. But if my story could inspire others, give them hope in their darkest moments, maybe that was a kind of heroism. A soft knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. Dr. Chun entered, a cautious smile on her face and a folder tucked under her arm. "Good morning, Tyler," she said, her tone measured but optimistic. "I assume you've seen the news?" I nodded, gesturing to the TV still playing footage of Elaine Cho being led away in handcuffs. "It's surreal. I never thought we'd see this day." Dr. Chen's smile widened. "It's a big step forward. But that's not the only good news I have for you today." She opened the folder, pulling out a series of charts and images. "Your latest test results came back this morning. Tyler, the treatment is working. We're seeing a significant slowdown in the progression of the organ damage." I stared at her, hardly daring to believe what I was hearing. Are you sure?" She nodded, her professional demeanor cracking to reveal genuine joy. "I've triple-checked the results myself. Does not a cure, not yet, but it's the first real sign of improvement we've seen. The treatment Dr. Winters helps develop, it's giving your body a fighting chance." Tears welled up in my eyes, a mix of relief, gratitude, and tentative hope. "So what happens now?" Dr. Chun sat on the edge of my bed, her expression turning serious. "We continue the treatment, monitor you closely. There's still a long road ahead, Tyler. Your body has been through immense trauma, and recovery will be slow and challenging. But for the first time, I can say with confidence that recovery is a real possibility." As the implications of her words sank in, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a weight I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. For months, I'd been living on borrowed time, fighting not for recovery but merely for a few more days, a few more hours. The idea that I might have a future beyond this hospital room, beyond the next treatment or the next crisis, was almost too much to comprehend. Sarah arrived just as Dr. Chun was leaving, her face flushed with excitement from the news and the rush to get to the hospital. She took one look at my tear-streaked face and Dr. Chen's smile and let out a cry of joy, enveloping me in a gentle but fierce hug. "It's working?" she asked, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "The treatment's really working?" I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. We held each other for a long moment, years of fear and pain and desperate hope pouring out in shared tears. As the day wore on, my room became a hub of activity. Richard Dawson arrived with updates on the legal proceedings, his usually composed demeanor cracking with excitement as he detailed the implications of Cho's arrest. "This changes everything," he said, pacing the small room. "With the CEO in custody and the evidence from Dr. Winters, we're in a position to push for a much more comprehensive settlement." Not just financial compensation, but real, systemic changes in how these companies operate. I listened, trying to focus on Dawson's words, but my mind kept drifting. I was grateful for the legal victories, for the justice being served. But in that moment, all I could think about was the possibility of a future I'd thought lost forever. As evening fell, the excitement of the day began to take its toll. Exhaustion crept in, my body reminding me that despite the good news, I was still very much in recovery. Sarah, ever attentive, noticed my flagging energy. "All right, that's enough for today," she announced, gently but firmly ushering Dawson and the nurses out of the room. "Tyler needs to rest." Once we were alone, Sarah sat beside me, taking my hand in hers. "How are you really feeling?" she asked softly. "This is a lot to process," I sighed, sinking back into my pillows. "Overwhelmed," I admitted. "Grateful. Terrified." Sarah squeezed my hand. "Terrified? Of what?" I closed my eyes, voicing the fear that had been growing all day. "Of hope," I whispered. "I've spent so long preparing for the worst, Sarah. I don't know if I remember how to hope for something better." Sarah was quiet for a moment, her thumb tracing soothing circles on the back of my hand. When she spoke, her voice was firm but gentle. "Then we'll learn together, one day at a time, okay? We'll face whatever comes next, good or bad, together." I nodded, too exhausted for words, but profoundly grateful for her unwavering support. As I drifted off to sleep, my mind swirled with images of a future I'd thought lost, a future of health, of purpose, of life beyond the shadow of Miracle Thin. The next few weeks passed in a blur of treatments, tests, and cautious optimism. Each day brought small victories, a little more energy, a little less pain, test results that showed slow but steady improvement. The experimental treatment continued to show promise, not just for me but for other Miracle Thin victims who had started similar protocols. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were setbacks, days when the pain was overwhelming, when the side effects of the treatment left me weak and nauseous. The legal battle, despite the arrest of Elaine Cho, dragged on, with New Life's army of lawyers fighting tooth and nail against every claim. Through it all, the support of the Miracle Thin victim community kept me going. Messages poured in daily, stories of struggle and resilience, words of encouragement and gratitude. I found myself spending hours each day responding, offering what comfort and hope I could. It was during one of these sessions, about a month after Cho's arrest, that I received a call from Dr. Chun. "Tyler," she said, her voice tight with barely contained excitement, "I need you to come down to my office. There's something you need to see." Intrigued and a little nervous, I made my way down to her office, moving slowly but under my own power, another small victory. When I entered, I found not just Dr. Chun but also Dr. Winters, who had become an integral part of the research team working on the XR714 antidote. "What's going on?" I asked, looking between their beaming faces. Dr. Chun gestured to a series of images on her computer screen. "These are your latest scans, Tyler. Compare them to where we started." I leaned in, my breath catching in my throat as I saw the difference. Where once there had been a landscape of damage and decay, now there were clear signs of healing. It wasn't complete, not by a long shot, but it was undeniable. "Does this mean?" I couldn't finish the sentence, afraid to voice the hope aloud. Dr. Winters stepped forward, her eyes shining. "It means the treatment is working better than we could have hoped. Your body is actually beginning to repair the damage caused by XR714. I sank into a chair, overwhelmed. "So I'm going to be okay?" Dr. Chen's smile was cautious but genuine. "You have a long road ahead, Tyler. But yes, I believe you're going to be okay. More than okay. You're going to have a chance at a full life." As the implications of her words sank in, I felt a laugh bubble up from deep inside me. a sound of pure joy I hadn't heard from my own lips in what felt like a lifetime. It was a laugh of relief, of gratitude, of hope reborn. In that moment, I knew we had reached a turning point, not just for me, but for all the victims of Miracle Thin. We had faced the darkest depths of corporate greed and medical malpractice, and we were emerging on the other side, battered and scarred, but alive and fighting. The battle wasn't over. There would be more challenges ahead, physical, legal, emotional. But for the first time since I'd swallowed that first Miracle Thin pill, I felt truly, unequivocally alive. As I left Dr. Chen's office that day, I made a silent vow. I would use this second chance, this miraculous turn of events, to continue the fight. Not just for myself, but for every person whose life had been upended by the false promises of a miracle cure. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but with each step, with each small victory, we would reclaim our lives and our futures. And in doing so, we would ensure that the legacy of Miracle Thin was not one of destruction, but of resilience, justice, and hope. The steady beep of medical equipment filled the air as I slowly regained consciousness. My eyelids felt heavy, but I forced them open, blinking against the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room. The familiar scent of antiseptic and the sight of 4 lines snaking from my arms told me I was back in intensive care. "Tyler, can you hear me?" Sarah's voice, sick with worry, came from somewhere to my left. I turned my head, wincing at the stiffness in my neck. Sarah's face came into focus, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, but a relieved smile spreading across her features. What happened?" I croaked, my throat dry and raw. Sarah reached for a cup of water, holding the straw to my lips. As I sipped gratefully, she explained, "You had a setback. The new treatment, there were complications. You've been unconscious for 3 days." The memories came flooding back, the experimental procedure, the searing pain that had torn through my body, the world fading to black as alarms blared around me. Did it work? I asked, afraid of the answer. Before Sarah could respond, Dr. Chan entered the room, her face a mask of professional concern. "Welcome back, Tyler," she said, moving to check my vitals. "You gave us quite a scare." I swallowed hard, steeling myself. "Just tell me, document. How bad is it?" Dr. Chen's expression softened. "Actually, Tyler, the news is cautiously good. The procedure was more intense than we anticipated, which is what caused your collapse. But," she paused, a small smile playing at her lips, "the latest tests show significant improvement. The damage from XR714 has been halted, and we're seeing signs of tissue regeneration." I stared at her, hardly daring to believe what I was hearing. "Do you mean I'm getting better?" Dr. Chen nodded. "It's early days, and you have a long recovery ahead. But yes, Tyler, you're getting better." The room spun around me, and for a moment, I thought I might pass out again. Sarah gripped my hand tightly, anchoring me. "It worked," I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. "It really worked." The next few weeks passed in a blur of tests, physical therapy, and cautious optimism. Slowly but surely, I regained my strength. The constant pain that had been my companion for months began to recede, replaced by a newfound energy I had almost forgotten was possible. One morning, about a month after the procedure, I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my hospital room, really looking at myself for the first time in ages. The gaunt, sickly figure I had become was starting to fill out. There was color in my cheeks, and the dark circles under my eyes had faded. A knock at the door interrupted my self-examination. "Come in," I called, turning away from the mirror. Richard Dawson entered, a thick folder tucked under his arm and a grim expression on his face. "Tyler," he greeted me, his tone serious. "We need to talk." I nodded, gesturing for him to sit. "What's going on, Richard? Is it about the case?" Dawson sighed heavily, opening the folder. The good news is, with the evidence from Dr. Winters and your miraculous recovery, we're in a very strong position. New Life is desperate to settle. I frowned, sensing there was more. And the bad news? They want you to sign a non-disclosure agreement. If you accept their settlement, you won't be able to speak publicly about what happened to you or about Miracle Finn. The words hit me like a physical blow. After everything I'd been through, everything I'd fought for, they wanted me to stay silent? Absolutely not. I said, my voice hard. I won't be bought off. People need to know the truth about what these pills did to us. Dawson nodded, as if he'd expected this response. I understand, Tyler, but I need you to consider this carefully. The settlement they're offering, it's substantial. Enough to cover all your medical expenses, with plenty left over to set you up for life. I shook my head vehemently. It's not about the money, Richard. It never has been. This is about justice, about making sure this never happens to anyone else. Dawson leaned forward, his expression earnest. I know, Tyler, and I admire your principles, but think about the other victims. Many of them desperately need the settlement money for their ongoing medical care. If you refuse, if we go to trial, it could be years before they see any compensation. His words gave me pause. I thought of Maria, of all the other Miracle Finn victims I'd connected with over the past months. Could I really put my principles above their immediate needs? I need some time to think about this, I said finally. Dawson nodded, standing to leave. Of course, take all the time you need. But Tyler, whatever you decide, know that you've already done more for this cause than anyone could have asked. After he left, I sank onto my bed, my mind whirling. The idea of staying silent, of letting New Life off the hook, made my stomach churn. But the thought of denying the other victims the compensation they so desperately needed was equally unbearable. I was still lost in thought when Sarah arrived for her daily visit. One look at my face told her something was wrong. Tyler, what happened? She asked, sitting beside me on the bed. I explained the situation, my voice growing more frustrated with each word. Sarah listened quietly, her brow furrowed in concern. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then, she took my hand in hers. Tyler, look at me, she said softly. I met her gaze, seeing the love and support that had been my lifeline through this ordeal. You've fought so hard, Sarah continued. You've risked everything to expose the truth about Miracle Finn. No one could ever accuse you of selling out or giving up. Maybe it's time to let someone else carry the torch. I opened my mouth to protest, but she held up a hand to stop me. Cheer me out. Think of all the good you could do with that settlement money. You could start a foundation to support victims of pharmaceutical negligence. You could fund research into safer weight loss methods. You could still make a difference, just in a different way. Her words resonated, offering a perspective I hadn't considered. Could I do more good by accepting the settlement and using the resources to continue the fight on a different front? As I grappled with the decision, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from Dr. Winters, marked urgent. With a sense of trepidation, I opened it. Tyler, I hope this email finds you well. I've just received word that New Life is planning to restart production of XR714 under a different name. They're claiming to have refined the formula, but from what I've seen, it's the same dangerous compound. I'm doing everything I can to stop this, but I'm hitting walls at every turn. Your voice could make all the difference. I know they're pressuring you to stay quiet, but please, consider going public with everything we know. It might be our last chance to prevent history from repeating itself. I understand if you can't. You've already sacrificed so much, but I had to ask. Stay strong, Amelia. My hands shook as I lowered the phone. The thought of more people suffering as I had, of families being torn apart by the effects of this poison. It was unbearable. In that moment, my decision crystallized. I couldn't stay silent, not when lives were at stake. I looked up at Sarah, determination setting my jaw. "I can't take the settlement," I said. "I have to testify. I have to tell the whole truth, no matter the cost." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, squeezing my hand. "I know," she whispered. "I've never been more proud of you." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Dawson worked tirelessly to prepare me for my testimony, while Dr. Chun ran a battery of tests to ensure I was strong enough for the stress of a trial. Finally, the day arrived. As I stood outside the courtroom, adjusting the tie Sarah had carefully knotted for me, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Whatever happened next, I knew I was doing the right thing. The bailiff called my name, and I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders. As I walked into the courtroom, I caught sight of the New Life executives, their faces a mixture of anger and fear. But my gaze was drawn to the public gallery, packed with Miracle Thin victims and their families. Their eyes were filled with hope, with the weight of their trust in me to speak for them all. As I took my place on the witness stand, I thought of how far I'd come. From a desperate man willing to risk everything for a quick fix, to someone willing to give up millions to stand up for what was right. The journey had been painful, terrifying, and at times, seemingly hopeless. But it had also shown me the strength I never knew I had, the power of community, and the importance of fighting for the truth no matter the cost. I raised my right hand as the clerk began to swear me in. This was it, the moment of truth. As I opened my mouth to speak, I silently renewed my vow to all those who had suffered because of Miracle-T. I would tell our story. I would fight for justice, and I would do everything in my power to ensure that no one else would ever have to endure what we had. The aftermath of Miracle Thin had changed me forever, but as I prepared to testify, I realized it had also given me a purpose, and that, perhaps, was the most unexpected miracle of all. The auditorium was packed. A sea of faces turned expectantly towards the stage. The air buzzed with anticipation, punctuated by the occasional cough or rustle of movement. I stood behind the curtain, my heart pounding in my chest, clutching my note cards like a lifeline. "You've got this, Tyler," Sarah whispered, giving my hand a reassuring squeeze. "Just remember why you're here." I nodded, taking a deep breath. It had been 2 years since my testimony had blown the lid off the Miracle Thin scandal. 2 years of grueling recovery, of legal battles, of learning to live in a body forever changed by the ordeal. And now, here I was, about to address the first annual conference of the Phoenix Foundation, an organization born from the ashes of the Miracle Thin tragedy, dedicated to supporting victims of pharmaceutical negligence and advocating for stricter industry oversight. The MC's voice boomed through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the founder of the Phoenix Foundation, Mr. Tyler Matthews." A round of applause erupted as I stepped out onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinding me. As my eyes adjusted, I saw them hundreds of faces, many of them familiar from support group meetings and online forums. Fellow survivors, family members, healthcare professionals, all united in their determination to prevent another Miracle Thin disaster. I approached the podium, my legs steady beneath me. A simple act that still felt like a miracle after months of physical therapy. Clearing my throat, I began to speak. 2 years ago, I stood in a courtroom and told the world about how a pill I thought would change my life for the better nearly destroyed me instead. Today, I stand before you not as a victim, but as a survivor. As we all are survivors, my gaze swept across the audience, making eye contact with familiar faces. Maria, her once frail body now strong and vibrant. Dr. Winters, whose brave whistleblowing had saved countless lives. Even Jason, who had reached out months after my testimony, full of remorse for his earlier abandonment. The journey that brought us here was not one any of us would have chosen, I continued. We've faced pain, fear, and loss beyond measure, but we've also discovered strength we never knew we possessed, forged bonds that can never be broken, and found a purpose that gives meaning to our suffering. As I spoke, I felt the familiar twinge in my abdomen, a permanent reminder of the damage Miracle Finn had wrought. But instead of flinching from it, I embraced it. It was part of me now, a battle scar that told the story of my survival. Today, we gather not to dwell on the past, but to look to the future. The Phoenix Foundation is more than just a support network. It's a promise that we will never stop fighting for justice, for accountability, and for the safety of all consumers. I went on to outline the Foundation's achievements over the past year, the support groups established in every major city, the legal fund that had helped dozens of victims seek compensation, the awareness campaigns that had reached millions. But our work is far from over, I said, my voice growing passionate. Even now, there are companies out there willing to put profit before people's lives. There are regulators turning a blind eye to dangerous practices. There are desperate individuals, just like I was, willing to risk everything for the promise of a quick fix. The audience hung on every word, many nodding in agreement, some wiping away tears. That's why we're here, to say no more cutting corners, no more burying evidence, no more treating human lives as acceptable collateral damage in the pursuit of profit. As I neared the end of my speech, I stepped away from the podium, wanting to connect more directly with the audience. I want you to look around, I said, gesturing to the packed auditorium. Look at the person next to you. These are not just statistics or case numbers. These are real people, with real stories, real pain, and real courage. We are the faces of the Miracle Finn tragedy, but we are also the faces of hope, of resilience, of change. I paused, letting my words sink in. Then, with a smile, I delivered my closing lines. We rose from the ashes of Miracle Finn, and like the phoenix we've named ourselves after, we will continue to rise, stronger and more determined with each challenge. Together, we will create a world where no one has to suffer as we did. Thank you. The applause was deafening as I left the stage, my legs shaky with adrenaline and emotion. Sarah was there to meet me, enveloping me in a tight hug. That was incredible, she whispered, her voice choked with pride. As we made our way to the reception area, I was swarmed by well-wishers and fellow survivors, each with a story to share or a word of thanks. It was overwhelming, but in the best possible way. Tyler, a familiar voice called out. I turned to see Maria pushing her way through the crowd, her face beaming. That speech. You said everything we've all been feeling. Thank you. I hummed her tightly, marveling at how far we'd both come. How are you doing, Maria? I asked as we pulled apart. Her smile widened. I'm good. Really good, actually. The doctors say I'm officially in remission. She paused, her eyes sparkling. I'm pregnant. Joy surged through me. Maria, that's amazing. Congratulations. As we chatted, catching up on each other's lives, I couldn't help but reflect on the strange, terrible, wonderful journey that had brought us to this point. 2 years ago, we had been strangers, united only by our suffering. Now we were family, bound by something stronger than blood. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversations, each one reinforcing the importance of the work we were doing. As the crowd began to thin, I found myself drawn to a quiet corner of the room, needing a moment to process everything. I stood before a large window, gazing out at the city lights. My reflection stared back at me, a face older and wiser than the one that had first swallowed those fateful pills, but also stronger, more assured. Quite a view, isn't it? A voice behind me made me turn. It was Dr. Chun, a glass of champagne in her hand and a warm smile on her face. "Dr. Chun," I greeted her, genuinely pleased to see her. "I'm so glad you could make it." She joined me at the window. "I wouldn't have missed it for the world, Tyler. What you've accomplished here. It's truly remarkable." I shook my head. "I couldn't have done any of it without you. Without your care, your dedication." Dr. Chun held up a hand to stop me. "I was just doing my job. You're the one who turned a personal tragedy into a movement. You should be proud." We stood in companionable silence for a moment, both lost in thought. "You know," Dr. Chun said finally, "in all my years of practice, I've never seen anything quite like your case. The extent of the damage, the miraculous recovery. You've rewritten medical textbooks, Tyler." I chuckled softly. "Not exactly how I planned to make my mark on the world." Dr. Chen's expression turned serious. "How are you really doing, Tyler? And don't give me the speech version. I want the truth." I considered her question carefully. "Honestly, I'm okay. There are still bad days when the pain flares up, when I'm haunted by memories of what happened. But they're getting fewer and farther between. And the good days, they make it all worthwhile." Dr. Chun nodded, satisfied with my answer. "And physically? The last scans were clear," I reported. "No sign of further deterioration. I'll never be 100% what I was before, but I'm learning to work with what I've got. It's a new normal, I guess." "A new normal," Dr. Chun repeated thoughtfully. "I like that. It's a good way to look at it." As we continued to chat, I felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over me. For Dr. Chun, for Sarah, for everyone who had been part of this journey. Even for the hardships themselves, which had shaped me into the person I was today. The sound of Sarah calling my name drew me back to the present. "Tyler, it's almost time for the candle lighting ceremony." I nodded, turning back to Dr. Chun. "Zudi calls," I said with a smile. She raised her glass in a toast. "To new normals, and to the phoenix rising from the ashes." I made my way to the center of the room, where a large circle had formed. In the middle stood a single, unlit candle. As I took my place, Sarah handed me a lighter. "Friends," I addressed the gathering, my voice carrying across the now quiet room. "We come to the most solemn part of our evening. This candle represents all those we've lost to pharmaceutical negligence, not just to Miracle Thin, but to every drug rushed to market without proper testing, every side effect swept under the rug, every life deemed an acceptable loss in the pursuit of profit." I paused, allowing the weight of the moment to settle over the room. "But it also represents hope, the light that guides us forward, that illuminates the path to a safer, more just future." As I light this candle, I ask each of you to remember why we're here, to remember those we've lost, and to recommit ourselves to the fight ahead. With a steady hand, I lit the candle. Its flame flickered to life, casting a warm glow across the faces of those gathered around. May this light remind us always of our mission, our community, and our unwavering determination to create change. As we stood in silence, watching the candle burn, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be setbacks, challenges, days when the weight of our mission felt overwhelming. But in that moment, surrounded by fellow survivors and allies, watching the candlelight dance in their determined eyes, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: we would prevail. Not just for ourselves, but for every person who might one day be tempted by the false promise of a miracle cure. For every family that might be spared the pain we had endured. For a future where profit never again took precedence over human life. In the soft glow of the candle, I saw not just who we were, but who we were becoming. Survivors, advocates, warriors for change. And in that transformation, in that rebirth from the ashes of tragedy, lay the truest miracle of all. And this was a report Before we go to the next one, leave your opinion in the comments. We would love to know. Now let's move on to the next one. The last cardboard box hit the hardwood floor with a dull thud, sending a small cloud of dust dancing in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the bay window. I straightened up, pressing my hands against the small of my back, and let out a satisfied groan. After weeks of packing, moving, and unpacking, I was finally done. "Welcome home, Jake," I muttered to myself, a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. I took a moment to survey my new living room. The old Victorian house had character. Creaky floorboards, ornate moldings, and a sense of history that you just couldn't find in modern builds. It was everything I had dreamed of when I decided to leave the bustling streets of Richmond for the quiet charm of rural Virginia. As I moved to the kitchen to grab a well-deserved beer, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was my sister, Kate. "Hey, stranger," I answered, wedging the phone between my ear and shoulder as I rummaged through the fridge. "What's up? Just checking in on my favorite brother." Kate's voice crackled through the speaker. "How's the new place?" "All moved in." I popped the cap off the beer bottle and took a long swig before responding. "Just finished unpacking the last box." "It's perfect, Kate. You should see it. The house, the land. It's exactly what I needed." "I'm glow, Jake. Really." There was a pause, and I could practically hear her biting her lip. "But are you sure you're okay out there all alone? It's been less than a year since." "I'm fine." I cut her off, perhaps a bit too sharply. "Nook, I appreciate the concern, but this is good for me. A fresh start, you know?" Kate sighed. "I know. Just don't be a stranger, okay? Call me if you need anything." "Will do. Love you, sis." "Love you too, Jake." As I ended the call, a flicker of guilt gnawed at my conscience. Kate had always been there for me, especially after the accident. But she couldn't understand. Nobody could. This move wasn't just about a change of scenery. It was about escaping the memories, the nightmares, the constant reminders of what I'd done. I shook my head, trying to dispel the dark thoughts. This was supposed to be a new beginning. I grabbed my beer and headed out to the back porch, determined to enjoy the sunset over my new property. The porch creaked under my weight as I settled into an old rocking chair. Before me, the backyard stretched out, a carpet of overgrown grass giving way to a small copse of trees at the far end. And there, about 50 yards from the house, stood the old well. It was a simple structure, a circular stone wall about 3 feet high, topped with a wooden frame supporting a small roof. A rusty bucket hung from a chain, swaying slightly in the evening breeze. There was something quaint about it, like a snapshot from another era. As the sun dipped below the tree line, casting long shadows across the yard, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The chirping of crickets filled the air, a soothing symphony of nature. I closed my eyes, letting the tension of the past few weeks melt away. That's when I heard it. First, it was so faint I thought I had imagined it. A whisper, barely audible above the evening sounds. My eyes snapped open, scanning the darkening yard. "Hello," I called out, feeling slightly foolish. Of course, there was no answer. I was about to chalk it up to an overactive imagination when I heard it again. This time, there was no mistaking it. It was a whisper, and it seemed to be coming from the direction of the well. A chill ran down my spine, raising goosebumps on my arms despite the warm summer evening. I set my beer down with a shaky hand and stood up, my eyes fixed on the well. "Is someone there?" I called out again, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet yard. The whisper came again, louder this time. I couldn't make out the words, but there was something in the tone that made my heart race. It sounded urgent, insistent. Before I knew what I was doing, I was walking across the yard, drawn to the well like a moth to a flame. The grass was damp with evening dew, soaking through my socks, but I barely noticed. All my attention was focused on the stone structure before me. As I approached, the whispering grew louder, but no clearer. It was as if someone was talking just below the range of my hearing. I reached out a trembling hand and touched the stone rim of the well. It was ice cold. I jerked my hand back, startled by the unnatural chill. It had been a warm day, and the stone should have retained some of the sun's heat. This felt like touching a block of ice. "What the hell?" I muttered, rubbing my fingers together. The whispering suddenly stopped, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. The crickets had fallen quiet, and even the rustle of leaves seemed muted. The whole world was holding its breath, waiting. I leaned forward, peering into the inky blackness of the well. The last rays of sunlight didn't penetrate far, and I couldn't see the bottom. A musty, damp smell wafted up, bringing with it a hint of something else. Something metallic and vaguely familiar. "Hello," I called down the well, my voice echoing off the stone walls. "Is anyone down there?" For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, just as I was about to pull back, it came. "Jake," my name, clear as day, whispered from the depths of the well. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. "Who's there?" I shouted, fear and confusion warring in my mind. "How do you know my name?" The answer came not from the well, but from directly behind me. A cold whisper that felt like a knife against my ear. "I know what you did." I spun around so fast I nearly lost my balance, but there was no one there. Just the darkening yard and the silent trees beyond. My breath came in short, panicked gasps as I backed away from the well, my eyes darting around for any sign of movement. But I was alone, or at least I appeared to be. I turned and ran back to the house, slamming the porch door behind me and locking it with shaking hands. I leaned against it, sliding down to sit on the floor as my legs gave out. "It's not real," I told myself, running my hands through my hair. "It's not real. You're tired. You're imagining things." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. The voice had been too clear, too real, and it had known my name, known what I'd done. I spent the rest of the night huddled on the couch, every light in the house blazing, jumping at every creak and groan of the old building settling. Sleep was out of the question. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that whisper again. "I know what you did." As the first light of dawn began to seep through the windows, I made a decision. I couldn't stay here. This house, this land. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a place to escape my past. Instead, it seemed my darkest secret had followed me here, manifesting in that godforsaken well. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over Kate's number. She would understand, wouldn't she? She'd help me pack up, find a new place. I could make up some excuse. The house needed more work than I thought. The commute was too long. Anything but the truth. But as I was about to hit call, a new whisper filled the room. Not from outside, not from the well, but from somewhere deep inside my own mind. "You can't run from this, Jake. You can't hide. It's time to face what you've done." I let the phone slip from my fingers, clattering to the floor. The voice was right. I had been running for too long, hiding from the truth, from the consequences of my actions. Whatever was happening here, whatever force had drawn me to this place, I knew one thing for certain. My life would never be the same again. The harsh morning light filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across the living room. I blinked, disoriented, my neck stiff from a night spent curled up on the couch. For a blissful moment, I forgot where I was and why I'd slept there. Then it all came rushing back. The well, the whispers, the cold voice that knew my darkest secret. "Get it together, Jake," I muttered, rubbing my face with trembling hands. It wasn't real. It couldn't have been real. I forced myself to stand, wincing at the protest of my cramped muscles. The house was silent now, bathed in the ordinary light of day. It all seemed so normal, so mundane. How could I have let my imagination run so wild last night? As I shuffled to the kitchen to make coffee, I caught sight of my reflection in a window. Dark circles shadowed my eyes, and my usually neat beard was unkempt. I looked like a man on the edge, and I felt like one too. The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the kitchen with the comforting aroma of brewing coffee. I leaned against the counter, trying to make sense of what had happened. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe it was stress from the move, or perhaps I'd had one too many beers on an empty stomach. The coffee finished brewing, and I poured myself a large mug, inhaling the steam. As the caffeine began to work its magic, I felt my nerves settling. In the light of day, last night's terror seemed almost laughable. That's when the doorbell rang. I nearly dropped my mug, coffee slashing over the rim and scalding my hand. Heart pounding, I approached the front door. Through the frosted glass, I could make out two figures standing on my porch. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door. "Good morning," a cheerful voice greeted me. A middle-aged couple stood there, all smiles and Midwestern politeness. "We're the Johnsons. We live just down the road and wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood." I blinked, momentarily stunned by this slice of normalcy. Thanks. I'm Jake. Jake Connor." The woman, a petite blonde with laugh lines around her eyes, thrust a covered dish towards me. "We brought you a casserole. Moving can be such a hassle. We thought you might appreciate a home-cooked meal." That's very kind of you," I managed, accepting the dish. "Would you like to come in for coffee?" The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them. Part of me wanted to slam the door and hide, but a larger part craved human interaction, something to ground me in reality. "We'd love to," the man replied, following his wife into my living room. As I busied myself in the kitchen, fetching mugs and cream, I could hear them commenting on the house. "Oh, Frank, look at these moldings. You don't see craftsmanship like this anymore. You've got yourself a real piece of history here." "Jake," Frank called out, "this house has been standing since before the Civil War. Did you know that?" I returned with the coffee, plastering on what I hoped was a convincing smile. "No, I didn't. The real estate agent mentioned it was old, but I didn't realize how old." As we settled into conversation, I found myself relaxing. The Johnsons were easy to talk to, full of local history and gossip. For a while, I almost forgot about the events of the previous night. Then Frank asked the question I'd been dreading. "So, Jake, what brought you out here to our little corner of Virginia?" I froze, the mug halfway to my lips. What could I say? That I was running from my past? That I'd killed someone and gotten away with it? Just needed a change of pace, I said finally, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. City life was getting to be too much. "Mrs. Johnson, call me Linda," she'd insisted, nodded sympathetically. "Oh, I understand completely. So peaceful out here." "Edham," she leaned in conspiratorially, "I hope you don't mind me saying, but you look like you haven't slept a wink. Is everything all right?" I forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow even to my own ears. "Just still adjusting to country living, I guess. It's so quiet at night, you know?" Frank chuckled. "Oh, you'll get used to it. Soon enough. You won't be able to sleep without the sound of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl." As they prepared to leave, Linda paused at the door. "Oh, I almost forgot to mention, we're having a little neighborhood get-together next weekend. Sort of an end-of-summer barbecue. We'd love for you to come. Get to know everyone." "That sounds great," I lied, already knowing I'd find some excuse not to go. "Thanks for stopping by." As I closed the door behind them, the facade I'd been maintaining crumbled. I slumped against the wall, my heart racing. How long could I keep this up? How long before someone saw through the cracks in my carefully constructed normalcy? The rest of the day passed in a haze of forced productivity. I unpacked boxes, arranged furniture, anything to keep my mind occupied. But as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard, I felt the familiar tendrils of dread creeping in. I found myself standing at the kitchen window, staring out at the well. It looked so innocuous in the fading light, just a simple stone structure. Nothing sinister about it at all. "You're being ridiculous," I told myself firmly. "It was just your imagination. There's nothing out there." To prove it to myself, I decided to go out there. Just a quick walk to the well and back. Show myself there was nothing to be afraid of. The grass was cool under my bare feet as I crossed the yard. Cicadas buzzed in the trees, a chorus of summer's end. Everything was perfectly normal, until I reached the well. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees as I approached. I could see my breath misting in the air, despite the warm evening. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaking slightly. Is anyone there?" Silence. I let out a shaky laugh. "See? Nothing. You're losing it, Jake." I turned to head back to the house, relief flooding through me. And then I heard it. "Hate." My name, drawn out in a long, sibilant whisper. I spun around, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. "Who's there?" I shouted, fear and anger warring in my voice. "Show yourself. You can't hide from what you've done, Jake," the voice whispered, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "The truth will come out. It always does." "No," I moaned, clutching my head. "No, this isn't real. It can't be real." But even as I denied it, I knew. This was real. Whatever was happening, whatever force was at work here, it knew my secret. And it wasn't going to let me forget. I ran back to the house, slamming and locking the door behind me. My hands shook as I poured myself a generous measure of whiskey, downing it in one burning gulp. As the alcohol spread its numbing warmth through my body, I sank onto the couch, my mind racing. What was I going to do? Couldn't leave. Where would I go? But how could I stay here with that thing out there? I poured another drink, and another, trying to drown out the voice that echoed in my head. But no matter how much I drank, I couldn't escape the truth it spoke. I had killed someone. I had taken a life and gotten away with it. And now it seemed my past had caught up with me. As the whiskey bottle emptied and my vision blurred, I found myself drawn back to the window. The well stood silent in the moonlight, a dark sentinel holding the key to my guilt. In that moment, fueled by alcohol and desperation, I made a decision. I couldn't run from this anymore. I had to face it, whatever it was. Tomorrow I would go back to the well. I would confront this thing, this voice that knew my secret. And one way or another I would put an end to it. As I finally drifted off into an uneasy sleep, the whisper came one last time, soft and inexorable. "See you soon, Jake. We have so much to talk about." The pounding in my head matched the insistent rapping at the front door. I groaned, peeling my face off the leather couch where I'd passed out. The living room was a mess. Empty whiskey bottle on the coffee table, clothes strewn about, and the lingering stench of fear and alcohol. "Mr. Connor? Jake? Are you in there?" The voice was unfamiliar, tinged with concern. I stumbled to my feet, the room spinning slightly as I made my way to the door. Taking a deep breath, I opened it, squinting against the harsh morning light. A man in his early 50s stood on my porch, salt and pepper hair neatly combed, a look of worry etched on his face. Behind him, I could see a police cruiser parked in my driveway. "Jake Connor?" he asked, his eyes taking in my disheveled appearance. I nodded, trying to shake off the fog of my hangover. "That's me. What's this about?" He held up a badge. "I'm Sheriff Dum Hawkins. Mind if I come in? We've had some concerns from your neighbors. My stomach dropped. Had someone heard me shouting at the well last night? Or worse, had they heard the well talking back? Sure, I mumbled, stepping aside to let him in. Sorry about the mess. I'm still settling in. Sheriff Hawkins entered, his eyes scanning the room. I saw them linger on the empty whiskey bottle, and I felt a flush of shame creep up my neck. Mr. Connor, he began, turning to face me. We received a call from Linda Johnson this morning. She was worried about you, said you seemed distressed when she visited yesterday. And then there were reports of shouting coming from your property last night. Is everything all right? I ran a hand through my hair, buying time as I scrambled for an explanation. I'm fine, really. Just had a bit too much to drink last night, that's all. New house, you know? Still getting used to the sounds. The sheriff nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. I understand moving can be stressful, but if there's anything you need to talk about, really, I'm fine, I insisted, perhaps a bit too forcefully. I appreciate the concern, but it won't happen again. I promise. Sheriff Hawkins held my gaze for a long moment before nodding. All right then. But Jake, we're a small community here. We look out for each other. If you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out. As I closed the door behind him, relief washed over me, quickly followed by a wave of nausea. I barely made it to the bathroom before emptying the meager contents of my stomach. Leaning against the cold porcelain of the toilet, I closed my eyes, but the darkness only brought back memories of the night before. The well, the whispers, the crushing weight of my guilt. Pull yourself together, I muttered, forcing myself to stand. I needed to clear my head, to think rationally about what was happening. After a long, hot shower and 2 cups of strong coffee, I felt marginally more human. I stood at the kitchen window, staring out at the well. In the bright light of day, it looked harmless, almost quaint. But I knew better. Taking a deep breath, I stepped outside. The late summer air was heavy with humidity, cicadas buzzing in the trees. Each step towards the well felt like moving through molasses, my body fighting against the direction my mind was taking it. As I approached, the air grew cooler just like before. I steeled myself, placing my hands on the rough stone of the well's rim. All right, I said, my voice shaking slightly. I'm here. What do you want from me? For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, as if carried on a non-existent breeze, I heard it. Remember, Jake. Remember what you did. The words hit me like a physical blow, and suddenly, I was no longer standing in my backyard. I was back on that rain-slicked road 5 years ago, my hands gripping the steering wheel, music blaring from the speakers. I could smell the alcohol on my breath, see the rain streaking across the windshield, and there, suddenly illuminated in my headlights, was a figure crossing the road. No, I whispered, but I couldn't stop the memory from unfolding. Silence before panic set in. I saw myself getting out of the car, approaching the still form on the road. It was a young woman, probably in her early 20s. Her eyes were open, staring blankly at the sky as rain fell on her face. Blood pooled beneath her, mixing with the rainwater. Oh God, I heard myself say. Oh God, no. Please, no. But she didn't move. She didn't blink. She was gone, and I had killed her. The memory shifted, and I was back in my car, driving away from the scene, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I saw myself pulling into my garage, inspecting the damage to my car. The dent in the hood, the crack in the windshield. I watched as I meticulously cleaned the car, erasing all evidence of what I'd done. I saw myself rehearsing my story. I'd been home all night, hadn't gone out at all. The damage to the car must have happened in the parking lot at work, probably some hit and run. The images faded, and I found myself back in the present, on my knees before the well, tears streaming down my face. "Why?" I choked out. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you need to remember," the well whispered. "You need to face what you've done." "I remember," I shouted, anger suddenly flaring. "I remember every damn day. Do you think I've forgotten? Do you think I don't see her face every time I close my eyes?" "Then why haven't you confessed?" the well asked, its voice maddeningly calm. "Why do you continue to live your life as if nothing happened?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. Why hadn't I confessed? Fear, certainly. Fear of prison, of losing everything I'd worked for. But it was more than that. I can't. I whispered. "It's too late. It's been too long." "It's never too late to tell the truth, Jake," the well said. "But every day you wait, the weight of your guilt grows heavier." I stood up, my legs shaky. "What do you want from me? What are you?" "I am the voice of your conscience, Jake," the well replied. "I am the truth you've been running from, and I won't be silenced any longer." I stumbled back towards the house, my mind reeling. As I reached the porch, I heard the well's voice one last time. "You can't run forever, Jake. Sooner or later, you'll have to face what you've done." I slammed the door behind me, sliding down to sit on the floor, my head in my hands. The memory of that night played on repeat in my mind, every detail crystal clear. I don't know how long I sat there, lost in the past, but when I finally looked up, I knew what I had to do. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and did a search I should have done years ago. Hit and run accident, Virginia, 2018. The results loaded, and there she was. Emily Parker, 23 years old, a recent college graduate with her whole life ahead of her. The article described how she'd been found on the side of the road, the victim of a hit and run. The case was still unsolved. I clicked on a link to a more recent article, and my blood ran cold. Emily's parents had never given up hope of finding the person responsible for their daughter's death. They'd recently hired a private investigator to look into the case. As I read, a notification popped up on my phone. A new email. With trembling fingers, I opened it. It was from an address I didn't recognize, but the subject line made my heart stop. "We know what you did, Jake Connor." I stared at the screen, my mind racing. The well knew, and now it seemed someone else did too. My carefully constructed life was beginning to crumble around me. As the sun set outside, casting long shadows across my living room, I realized that my time was running out. I couldn't hide from the truth any longer. The question was, what was I going to do about it? The email glared at me from my phone screen, its subject line a damning accusation. "We know what you did, Jake Connor." My finger hovered over it, trembling. Did I dare open it? What more could it reveal about my crime? Before I could decide, a sharp knock at the door made me jump, nearly dropping the phone. My heart raced as I approached the door, half expecting to see the sheriff or worse, FBI agents ready to arrest me. Instead, I found myself face to face with Linda Johnson, her round face creased with concern. "Jake, dear," she said, her voice gentle. "I hope you don't mind me dropping by unannounced. I just wanted to check on you after the sheriff's visit this morning." I forced a smile, trying to appear normal despite the chaos raging inside me. "That's very kind of you, Linda. I'm fine, really. Just a misunderstanding." She peered at me, unconvinced. "Are you sure? You look awfully pale, and your hands are shaking." I glanced down, realizing she was right. I shoved my hands into my pockets. "Just a bit under the weather. Nothing to worry about." Linda's eyes narrowed slightly. "Chink, I hope you know you can talk to me if something's bothering you. We may be new neighbors, but I'm a good listener." For a moment I was tempted. The urge to confess, to unburden myself of this terrible secret, was almost overwhelming. But I couldn't. Not to Linda, not to anyone. I appreciate that, Linda. Really. But I'm okay. Just need some rest. She nodded, though I could see she wasn't entirely satisfied. All right, dear. But remember, you're part of our community now. Don't be a stranger. As I closed the door, Jilt nodded me. Linda's kindness only made me feel worse about the lie I was living. I turned back to my phone, steeling myself to open the email. But as I unlocked the screen, a new notification popped up. A voicemail from an unknown number. With shaking hands, I played the message. Mr. Connor, this is David Reeves, private investigator. I'm calling regarding the Emily Parker case. I have some questions I'd like to ask you. Please call me back at this number at your earliest convenience. The phone slipped from my fingers, clattering to the floor. They knew. Somehow they had connected me to Emily's death. My mind raced. Had someone seen me that night? Had I left some evidence behind? Panic rising in my throat, I rushed to my laptop. I had to know what they knew, had to find out how close they were to the truth. I spent the next few hours scouring the internet for any information on the Emily Parker case. News articles, forum discussions, social media posts. I read it all, my anxiety growing with each passing minute. One article caught my eye. It mentioned that the police had found paint chips at the scene, presumably from the vehicle that had struck Emily. My stomach churned as I remembered the damage to my car that I had so carefully repaired. As night fell, I found myself pacing the living room, my mind a whirlwind of fear and guilt. The walls seemed to be closing in. I needed air. Almost without conscious thought, I found myself walking towards the well. The night was eerily still, no breeze, no chirping crickets, just silence. I approached the well, my footsteps loud in the quiet night. "Are you happy now?" I called out, my voice cracking. "Is this what you wanted?" For a long moment, there was nothing. Then a whisper. "The truth will set you free, Jake." I laughed bitterly. "Free? I'll go to prison. I'll lose everything." "You've already lost everything that matters," the well replied. "Your peace of mind, your integrity, your soul." The truth of those words hit me like a physical blow. I sank to my knees, tears streaming down my face. "What do I do?" I whispered. "How do I fix this?" But the well remained silent, offering no easy answers. As I knelt there, lost in my despair, a new sound broke the silence. Car engine growing louder. Headlights swept across the yard as a vehicle pulled into my driveway. Panic surged through me. Had the police come for me? Was this the end? I scrambled to my feet, ready to run, though I knew it was futile. But as the car door opened, I recognized the figure that stepped out. "Tate," I called out, disbelief coloring my voice. My sister hurried towards me, her face a mask of worry. "Chink, what the hell is going on? I've been trying to reach you all day." As she got closer, she took in my disheveled appearance, my tear-stained face. "Oh, Jake," she said softly. "What have you done?" The dam broke. Words poured out of me in a torrent. The accident, the cover-up, the years of guilt, and now the well and its whispers. Kate listened in stunned silence, her eyes widening with each revelation. When I finally fell silent, exhausted, Kate took a deep breath. "Jake, this is serious. You need to turn yourself in." "I can't," I whispered. "I'm scared, Kate." She grabbed my shoulders, forcing me to look at her. "Listen to me. You can't run from this anymore. It's eating you alive. And now with this investigation, Chink, it's only a matter of time before they figure it out." I knew she was right, but the thought of confessing, of facing the consequences of what I'd done, terrified me. "What about Mom and Dad?" I asked, my voice small. "It'll kill them." Kate's eyes softened. "They love you, Jake." "Yes, they'll be hurt and disappointed, but they'd rather know the truth than see you destroy yourself like this. We stood there in silence for a long moment, the weight of the decision hanging between us. Finally, I nodded. "Okay," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do it. I'll turn myself in." Relief flooded Kate's face. She pulled me into a tight hug. "It's the right thing to do, Jake. I'll be with you every step of the way." As we walked back to the house, I felt a strange mix of terror and relief. The path ahead would be hard, but for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope. Just before we reached the porch, I glanced back at the well. In the moonlight, I could have sworn I saw a faint smile on the weathered stone. Inside, I sat at my desk, staring at a blank piece of paper. "I should write to Emily's parents," I said. "They deserve to know the truth directly from me." Tate nodded, squeezing my shoulder supportively. "That's a good idea. Do you want me to give you some privacy?" I shook my head. "No, please stay. I don't think I can do this alone." Taking a deep breath, I began to write. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Parker, you don't know me, but 5 years ago, I destroyed your lives. I am the person responsible for your daughter Emily's death." The words flowed, painful but cathartic. As I wrote, I felt the weight I'd been carrying for 5 years begin to lift. It wasn't gone. I knew I would carry the guilt of what I'd done for the rest of my life. But for the first time, it felt bearable. When I finished, I looked up at Kate, tears in my eyes. "What happens now?" She took my hand, her grip firm and reassuring. "Now we face this together. First thing tomorrow, we'll go to the police station. I'll be right there with you." I nodded, a mix of fear and resolve settling in my chest. As we sat there, the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows. A new day was beginning, and with it, a new chapter in my life. Whatever came next, arrest, trial, imprisonment, I would face it. I owed it to Emily, to her family, and to myself. As the sun rose, casting a warm glow over the room, I heard the wells whisper one last time. "The truth has set you free, Jake. Now make it count." I looked out the window at the old well, standing silent in the morning light. For the first time since I'd moved in, it didn't fill me with dread. Instead, I felt a strange sense of gratitude. It had forced me to confront my past, to face the truth I'd been running from for so long. And in doing so, it had given me a chance at redemption. The road ahead would be hard, but as I sat there with my sister, watching the new day dawn, I knew one thing for certain. I was finally on the right path. The fluorescent lights of the police station buzzed overhead, their harsh glare making me feel exposed and vulnerable. Kate sat beside me, her hand resting reassuringly on my arm as we waited. The hard plastic chair dug into my back, but the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the emotional turmoil raging inside me. "Jake Connor?" A gruff voice called out. I looked up to see a detective approaching, his face a mask of professional neutrality. "I'm Detective Shimons. Follow me, please." As I stood, Kate squeezed my arm. "Do you want me to come with you?" I shook my head. Go. I need to do this alone." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I'll be right here when you're done." The walk to the interrogation room felt like a march to the gallows. Each step brought me closer to the moment I'd been dreading for 5 years. As we entered the small, stark room, Detective Simmons gestured for me to sit. "Mr. Connor," he began, his voice level, "you asked to speak with us about the Emily Parker case. What can you tell me?" I took a deep breath, my hands shaking as I placed them on the cold metal table. I'm the one who hit her. I'm responsible for Emily Parker's death." The words hung in the air, heavy and irrevocable. Detective Simmons' expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker of something surprise, perhaps in his eyes. "That's a serious confession, Mr. Connor. Are you sure you don't want a lawyer present?" I shook my head. Lo, I've been running from this for too long. I need to tell the truth. What followed was the most difficult conversation of my life. I recounted every detail of that fateful night, the rain, the alcohol, the sickening thought of impact. I described my panic, my shameful decision to flee, the years of guilt and fear that followed. As I spoke, Detective Simmons took notes, occasionally asking for clarification. His face remained impassive, but I could sense his growing tension. When I finally fell silent, emotionally drained, he leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Connor, do you understand the gravity of what you're confessing to? Hit and run resulting in death is a felony. You're looking at significant jail time." I nodded, a strange sense of calm settling over me. "I understand. I'm ready to face the consequences of what I've done." Detective Simmons stood. "Wait here. I need to discuss this with the district attorney." As the door closed behind him, the reality of my situation began to sink in. This was it. There was no going back now. I thought of my parents, of my job, of the life I'd built. All of it would be gone. But beneath the fear and regret, there was also a glimmer of something else. Relief. The burden I'd carried for so long was finally lifting. Hours passed in a blur of questions, paperwork, and phone calls. I was fingerprinted, photographed, formally charged. Through it all, Kate remained a steady presence, her unwavering support the only thing keeping me grounded. As night fell, I found myself in a holding cell, waiting to be transferred to the county jail. Kate stood on the other side of the bars, her eyes red-rimmed but determined. "I called Mom and Dad," she said softly. "They're in shock, but they're on their way. They want you to know they love you no matter what." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "Jake," Kate continued, her voice breaking slightly, "I'm proud of you, what you did today. It took incredible courage." I managed a weak smile. "I don't feel very courageous. I feel terrified." "That's what makes it brave," she replied. "You did the right thing, even though it was the hardest thing in the world." As Kate left, promising to return in the morning, I lay on the hard cot, staring at the ceiling. Sleep seemed impossible, my mind racing with thoughts of what was to come. The trial, sentencing, prison. It was overwhelming. In the quiet of the cell, I found myself thinking of the will. Had it all been in my head? A manifestation of my guilt? Or was there really something supernatural at work? As if in answer to my unspoken questions, I heard a familiar whisper. "You've taken the first step, Jake, but your journey isn't over." I sat up, looking around the empty cell. "What do you mean? What more can I do?" The whisper came again, soft but clear. "Redemption isn't found in punishment alone. It's in what you do with the time you're given." Before I could respond, the voice faded, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of legal proceedings. I was assigned a public defender, a tired-looking woman named Sarah Jeffries. She didn't sugarcoat things. "With your confession and the evidence they have, fighting this in court would be futile," she explained during our first meeting. "Our best option is to negotiate a plea deal. Show remorse, emphasize that you turned yourself in. We might be able to get the sentence reduced." I nodded, still somewhat numb to it all. "What about Emily's family? Will they be at the hearing?" Sarah's expression softened slightly. "Yes, they will. They've been notified of your confession. Mr. Connor, Jake, they may want to speak to you." The thought filled me with equal parts dread and desperate hope. What could I possibly say to the people whose lives I destroyed? The day of my arraignment arrived all too soon. As I stood before the judge, entering my guilty plea, I was acutely aware of the people sitting in the gallery behind me. My parents, their faces etched with pain and confusion. Her chin lifted defiantly. supporting me despite everything. And there, on the other side, a couple I assumed were Emily's parents. The woman was crying silently, while the man stared at me with a mixture of anger and something I couldn't quite identify. As the judge set a date for sentencing and I was led away, I heard a commotion behind me. "Wait!" A voice called out. "Trees, I need to speak with him." I turned to see Emily's mother approaching, her husband close behind. The bailiff moved to intercept them, but the judge waved him off. "Mr. and Mrs. Sarker," the judge said gently, "you'll have an opportunity to speak at the sentencing hearing." "Trees," Mrs. Parker insisted, her eyes locked on me. Just for a moment, the judge hesitated, then nodded. "Very well. Nayless, escort Mr. Connor and the Parkers to a private room." 5 minutes. Heart pounding, I followed the bailiff, the Parkers close behind. As we entered a small conference room, I found myself face to face with the people I'd wronged so terribly. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Then, to my utter shock, Mrs. Parker stepped forward and embraced me. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for telling the truth." I stood frozen, unable to comprehend her reaction. As she stepped back, Mr. Parker spoke, his voice gruff with suppressed emotion. "We spent 5 years wondering, imagining, hating the faceless person who took our daughter from us," he said. And now we know. It doesn't bring Emily back, but we can start to heal," Mrs. Parker finished. "Knowing the truth, seeing that you're truly remorseful, it helps." Tears streamed down my face as I struggled to find words. "I'm so sorry," I managed finally. "I know it's not enough. It can never be enough. But I am so sorry for what I did." Mr. Parker nodded, his expression conflicted. "We can't forgive you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But we're grateful you came forward. It's more than we ever expected." As they turned to leave, Mrs. Parker paused. "Emily believed in second chances," she said softly. "Whatever sentence you receive, Mr. Connor, trees, make it count. Do something good with your life. For Emily." As the door closed behind them, I sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the unexpected grace I just witnessed. The Parkers' words echoed in my mind, mingling with the whispers from the well. Redemption. Segoshals. Making it count. In that moment, as I waited to be led back to my cell, I made a vow. Whatever time I had left, whether behind bars or beyond, I would dedicate it to honoring Emily's memory, to becoming the kind of person who deserved the second chance I'd been given. The path ahead was still daunting, filled with challenges I could barely imagine. But for the first time since that rainy night 5 years ago, I felt a spark of hope. The well had forced me to face my past. Now it was up to me to shape my future. The days leading up to my sentencing hearing blurred together in a haze of legal consultations and sleepless nights. I'd been released on bail, thanks to my parents mortgaging their house. The freedom felt more like a curse than a blessing. Each moment outside a reminder of the life I was about to lose. I was sitting at my kitchen table, staring blankly at a stack of legal documents, when a sharp knock at the door jolted me back to reality. My heart raced as I approached the door. These days, every unexpected visitor felt like a harbinger of doom. I opened the door to find 2 men in suits, their expressions serious and professional. "Jake Connor?" the taller of the 2 asked, flashing a badge. "I'm Detective Reeves, and this is my partner, Detective Morales. We're with the state police. We'd like to ask you a few questions about your confession." My mouth went dry. I've already told the local police everything," my lawyer said. "We understand, Mr. Connor," Detective Morales interrupted smoothly. "But some new information has come to light. We just need to clarify a few details." I hesitated, then nodded, stepping aside to let them in. As they settled onto my couch, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Detective Reeves pulled out a notebook. "Mr. Connor, in your confession, you stated that you were alone in the car on the night of Emily Parker's death. Is that correct?" "Yes," I replied, my voice shaking slightly. "It was just me." Morales leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Are you absolutely certain about that, Mr. Connor? Because we have a witness who claims they saw two people in the car that hit Emily." The room seemed to tilt around me. That's impossible. There was no one else. I was alone." Reeves and Morales exchanged a look. "Mr. Connor," Reeves said slowly, "we have reason to believe you might be covering for someone. If that's the case, now is the time to come clean. Protecting an accomplice will only make things worse for you." "I'm not protecting anyone," I insisted, panic rising in my throat. I told the truth. I was alone. I hit Emily. I drove away. It was just me. Morales sighed, pulling out a file. "We've been looking into your background, Mr. Connor, your movements in the days following the accident. And we found something interesting." He slid a photograph across the coffee table. This showed me, 5 years younger, sitting in a bar with a woman I barely remembered. "This was taken 2 days after Emily Parker's death," Morales continued. "The woman is Melissa Hawkins. Ring any bells?" I stared at the photo, memories slowly surfacing. I think I remember her. We met at the bar, talked for a while, but she had nothing to do with the accident. I didn't even know her before that night." Reeves leaned back, his expression skeptical. "That's not what Melissa says. She claims you were distraught that night, that you confided in her about a terrible mistake you'd made. She says you told her you weren't alone in the car." My mind reels. "That's not. I never said that. I was drinking, yes. I probably said some things I shouldn't have. But I never told her about the accident. And I certainly never said I wasn't alone. Because I was." The detectives continued their questioning, probing for inconsistencies, trying to trip me up. But I held firm to the truth, even as doubt and confusion clouded my mind. Finally, after what felt like hours, they stood to leave. "We'll be in touch, Mr. Connor," Reeves said, his tone ominous. "I suggest you think very carefully about what you've told us. If we find out you've been lying..." As the door closed behind them, I collapsed onto the couch, my head in my hands. What was happening? Had I somehow misremembered that night? No, that was impossible. I knew what had happened. I had lived with the guilt of it for 5 years. But then why would this Melissa person lie? And who was the witness who claimed to have seen two people in the car? My thoughts were interrupted by the shrill ring of my phone. It was Kate. "Jake? Are you okay? You sound terrible." I took a shaky breath. I think I'm in trouble. The police were just here. State detectives. They're saying I might not have been alone in the car that night." "What?" Kate's voice was sharp with disbelief. "Jake, that's ridiculous. You told me everything. I know you were alone. I know. But they have a witness, Kate. And this woman, someone I apparently met a few days after. She's saying I told her things. Things I know I never said." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Jake," Kate said finally, her voice low and serious. "Listen to me. You need to call your lawyer right now. Don't talk to anyone else about this. Not the police, not me, not anyone. Understand?" I nodded, then remembered she couldn't see me. Yeah, I understand." After hanging up, I immediately called Sarah Jeffries, my public defender. She listened to my account of the detective's visit, her voice growing increasingly concerned. "Jake, this is serious," she said when I finished. "If they can cast doubt on your confession, if they can suggest you were covering for someone else, it could complicate everything. We need to meet. First thing tomorrow morning, my office." That night, Sleep eluded me entirely. I paced my house, replaying every moment of that terrible night 5 years ago. I was certain I had been alone. So why did I feel a nagging doubt in the back of my mind? As dawn broke, I found myself standing in front of the well. Its weathered stones seemed to mock me in the pale morning light. "What's happening?" I whispered. I told the truth. I came clean. Why is this happening now? For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, so faint I almost missed it, came the whisper. "The truth is never simple, Jake. Day deeper." I frowned. What does that mean? What am I missing? But the well remained stubbornly silent. My meeting with Sarah was tense and frustrating. She grilled me on every detail of that night, searching for any inconsistency, any gap in my memory that could explain the new allegations. "Jake," she said finally, leaning back in her chair, "I believe you, but this complicates things. If the prosecution gets wind of this, they could argue that your confession was false or incomplete. It could void our plea deal. So what do we do?" I asked, feeling helpless. Sarah's expression was grim. "We need to do our own investigation. Find out who this witness is. Track down this Melissa woman. We need to understand where these claims are coming from before we can counter them." As I left Sarah's office, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Meet me at Riverside Park, 3 p.m. Come alone." I know the truth about that night. My hand shook as I stared at the message. Who could it be? Melissa, the mysterious witness, or someone else entirely? I knew I should tell Sarah, should probably ignore the message altogether. But the well's words echoed in my mind. Ding deeper. At 2:55 p.m., I found myself walking into Riverside Park, my heart pounding with each step. The park was mostly empty, a few joggers and dog walkers scattered here and there. As I approached the designated meeting spot, a bench overlooking the river, I saw a figure already seated there. A woman, her face hidden by large sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat. I sat down beside her, my mouth dry. "I got your message," I said quietly. "Who are you? What do you know about that night?" The woman turned to me, slowly removing her sunglasses. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized her. It was Linda Johnson, my neighbor from the old house. "Hello, Jake," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I think it's time we had a talk about what really happened the night Emily Parker died." As Linda began to speak, I felt the ground shift beneath me. Everything I thought I knew, everything I had confessed to, was about to be turned upside down. The truth, it seemed, was far more complicated than I had ever imagined. The world seemed to slow down as I stared at Linda, my neighbor from the old house, sitting next to me on the park bench. The gentle lapping of the river against the shore and the distant chatter of parkgoers faded into white noise as I struggled to process her words. "What do you mean, what really happened?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Linda's hands trembled as she clasped them in her lap. She looked older than I remembered, lines of worry etched deeply into her face. "Jake," she began, her voice quavering, "I've been carrying this secret for 5 years, and I can't do it anymore. Not after seeing what it's done to you, what you're going through now." My heart raced as I leaned in closer, hanging on her every word. "That night," Linda continued, "the night Emily Parker died, I was there. The admission hit me like a physical blow. I recoiled, nearly falling off the bench. What? No, that's impossible. I was alone. I know I was alone." Linda shook her head, tears forming in her eyes. "You weren't alone, Jake. I was in the passenger seat." My mind reeled, desperately trying to make sense of her words. Flashes of that rainy night played through my head, but try as I might, I couldn't picture Linda there. "I don't understand," I said, my voice rising with panic. "Why don't I remember this? Why are you only coming forward now? Linda took a deep breath, seeming to steel herself for what she was about to say. Because I made you forget, Jake. Or at least I tried to. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small vial filled with clear liquid. Do you know what this is? I shook my head, a growing sense of dread settling in the pit of my stomach. It's a powerful sedative, Linda explained. Mixed with alcohol, it can cause blackouts and memory loss. That night after the accident, I put it in your drink. The world tilted around me as the implications of her words sank in. You drugged me? I whispered, horror and disbelief warring in my voice. Linda nodded, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. I panicked, Jake. We both did. But you were talking about turning yourself in, about confessing everything. I couldn't let that happen. I had too much to lose. As Linda spoke, fragmented memories began to surface. The rain-slicked road, the sickening thud of impact, and Linda's voice, high and panicked. Oh God, Jink, what have we done? We were having an affair, Linda continued, her voice barely audible. That's why we were out that night. We'd been drinking, arguing about whether to tell Frank and end our marriages. You were distracted, driving too fast. I felt sick, memories I didn't know I had flooding back. The secret meetings, the stolen kisses, the guilt that had eaten away at me even before that fateful night. When we hit Emily, Linda went on. You wanted to stop, to call for help, but I was terrified. I begged you to keep driving, and you did. God help me, you did. I remembered now. The argument in the car, Linda's hysterical pleas, my own panic and indecision. After we got back to your house, Linda said, you were beside yourself with guilt. You kept saying we needed to go to the police. That's when I put the drug in your whiskey. She looked at me, her eyes pleading for understanding. I told myself I was protecting us both, that it was better if you didn't remember, if you thought you'd been alone. I never imagined you'd carry that guilt all on your own for so long. I sat in stunned silence, trying to reconcile this new reality with the narrative I'd believed for 5 years. The guilt, the nightmares, the confession I'd made, it had all been based on a lie. Why now? I finally asked, my voice hoarse. Why are you telling me this now? Linda wiped her eyes, her shoulders sagging with the weight of her confession. When I heard about your arrest, about your confession, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. And then when the detectives started asking questions, mentioning a witness who saw 2 people. You were the witness? I realized, the pieces falling into place. She nodded. Couldn't let you take the fall alone, Jake. Not anymore. It's time for the whole truth to come out. As Linda's words sank in, a maelstrom of emotions swept through me. Anger at her deception, relief at finally understanding the gaps in my memory, and a renewed sense of guilt and horror at what we'd done. We need to go to the police, I said, standing up abruptly. We need to tell them everything. Linda's eyes widened in fear. Jake, please, think about what this will do to our families, to Frank, to your parents. I shook my head, a strange calm settling over me. Linda, no more lies, no more cover-ups. We owe it to Emily and her family to tell the truth, the whole truth. As we made our way to the police station, my mind raced with the implications of what was about to happen. My confession would need to be amended, the plea deal possibly renegotiated, and Linda would face her own charges. The next few hours passed in a blur of statements, questions, and legal consultations. My lawyer, Sarah, looked shell-shocked as she listened to our revised account of that night. This changes everything, she muttered, scribbling furious notes. The prosecution will have a field day with this. As night fell, I found myself back in a holding cell, the events of the day swirling in my mind. Linda was in another part of the station, likely going through her own interrogation. In the quiet of the cell, I heard a now familiar whisper. "The truth will set you free, Jake, but first, it will shatter everything you thought you knew." I closed my eyes, leaning my head against the cold concrete wall. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked the empty air. "Why lead me to confess if you knew it wasn't the whole truth?" The whisper came again, soft but clear. "Some truths can only be discovered, not told. You needed to find your way to this moment." I pondered those words as exhaustion finally overtook me. As I drifted off into an uneasy sleep, I thought about the long road ahead, something that looked almost like relief. The long nightmare of not knowing was over for them, even if the pain would never truly end. The next few hours passed in a blur of processing and transport. Before I knew it, I was standing in a stark cell, the harsh clang of the door closing behind me echoing in my ears. This would be my home for the next decade or more of my life. As night fell and the prison settled into its routine, I lay on the hard bunk, staring at the ceiling. The events of the past few months played through my mind like a surreal movie. The whispers from the well, my initial confession, Linda's revelation, and finally, today's sentencing. Just as I was drifting into an uneasy sleep, I heard it, a faint whisper, somehow audible even through the thick prison walls. "The truth has been told, Jake, but your journey is far from over." I sat up, my heart racing. "What do you mean?" I whispered into the darkness. "What more can there be?" The voice came again, as cryptic as ever. "Redemption is not found in punishment alone, but in how you use the time you're given. Remember Emily. Honor her memory." As the whisper faded, I was left with a strange mix of emotions. Fear of the years ahead, guilt over the pain I'd caused, but also a glimmer of purpose. The next morning, I was introduced to the realities of prison life. The strict schedules, the loss of privacy, the constant underlying tension. As I stood in line for breakfast, a burly inmate behind me growled, "What are you in for, pretty boy?" I hesitated, then decided on honesty, vehicular manslaughter, and a cover-up. The man grunted, "Least you owned up to it eventually." More than most of these lowlifes would do. As the days turned into weeks, I slowly adjusted to my new life. I threw myself into every program the prison offered: counseling, education, work assignments, anything to keep my mind occupied and to feel like I was making some kind of progress, however small. One day, about a month into my sentence, I received a visitor I never expected, Mr. Parker, Emily's father. We sat across from each other in the visitation room, the weight of our shared history hanging heavy between us. "I don't really know why I'm here," Mr. Parker began, his voice gruff with emotion. "Part of me still hates you for what you did. I needed to see you, to try to understand." I nodded, unable to find words adequate for the moment. "Emily," Mr. Parker continued, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "She always believed in second chances, in redemption. It's taken me a long time, but I'm trying to honor that part of her." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. It showed a young woman with Emily's smile, surrounded by a group of children. "This was taken a month before she died," Mr. Parker explained. "Emily was volunteering at a literacy program for underprivileged kids. It was her passion." He slid the photo across the table to me. "I want you to have this, to remember her not just as the person as the victim, but as who she really was, the lives she touched." I took the photo with trembling hands, overwhelmed by the unexpected gesture. "Mr. Parker, He held up a hand, cutting me off. "I'm not saying I forgive you. I don't know if I ever can. But Emily would have wanted her death to mean something. So I'm asking you, no, I'm challenging you to make something good come out of this." to live the rest of your life in a way that would make her proud. As Mr. Parker left, his words echoed in my mind, intertwining with the whispers from the well. For the first time since my imprisonment, I felt a real sense of purpose forming. That night, as I lay in my bunk, I made a decision. I would use every day of my sentence to better myself, to learn, to grow. And when I got out, I would dedicate my life to continuing Emily's work, helping children, spreading literacy, making a positive difference in the world. It wouldn't erase what I'd done. Nothing ever could. But perhaps in some small way it could help balance the scales. As I drifted off to sleep, I heard the whisper one last time. Now you understand, Jake. This is how you honor her memory. This is how you find redemption. And for the first time in years, I slept without nightmares, the path ahead finally clear. The harsh fluorescent lights flickered to life, signaling the start of another day. I blinked awake, the familiar sounds of the prison stirring around me. It had been 3 years since that fateful day in court, 3 years of routine, reflection, and gradual change. As I swung my legs over the side of my bunk, my cellmate, Rodriguez, grunted a greeting. "Morning, Tonner. Big day today." "Suh." I nodded, a mix of nervousness and excitement churning in my stomach. "Yeah. First day of the new literacy program. After months of proposal writing, meetings with the warden, and jumping through bureaucratic hoops, I had finally gotten approval to start a literacy program for inmates. It felt like a small step towards fulfilling the promise I'd made to Mr. Parker and to myself. As I made my way to the prison library, which had been cleared for our use, I couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced in years. The room was already half full when I arrived, a dozen inmates seated at tables, looking equal parts curious and skeptical. I cleared my throat, willing my voice not to shake. "Good morning, everyone. I'm Jake Connor, and I'll be facilitating this literacy program. Before we start, I want to thank you all for being here. I know it's not easy to admit when you need help, especially in a place like this, but learning to read, to truly understand and communicate through words, it's freedom, it's power." As I spoke, I saw a few nods, a couple of eye rolls, but mostly just attentive faces. I continued, "I'm not here to judge anyone. I'm here because I made a promise to try and do some good in the world, to honor someone who can't be here herself. So let's get started, shall we?" The next 2 hours flew by as we worked through basic phonics and simple sentences. By the end of the session, I saw a glimmer of pride in some of the men's eyes as they successfully read their first complete paragraph. As the inmates filed out, one of them, a young man named Tyrell, hung back. "Hey, Connor," he said, his voice low. "I just wanted to say, thanks, man. I've been too embarrassed to tell anyone I can't read. But the way you talked about it, like it's not something to be ashamed of, it helped." I felt a lump form in my throat. "You're welcome, Tyrell. See you next week." He nodded, a small smile on his face as he left. That night, as I lay in my bunk, I felt a sense of accomplishment I hadn't experienced in years. It was a small thing, perhaps, in the grand scheme of things, but it felt like a start. Just as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard it, the familiar whisper, somehow audible even through the prison walls. "You're on the right path, Jake, but there's still more to learn, more to understand." I sat up, my heart racing. It had been years since I'd heard the voice. "What do you mean?" I whispered into the darkness. "What more is there?" The voice came again, as enigmatic as ever. "The truth has many layers. You've uncovered some, but not all. Keep digging." Before I could ask for clarification, the whisper faded, leaving me with a sense of unease. What more could there be to uncover? The next morning, I was surprised to be called to the visitation room. As I entered, I saw a familiar face, Detective Reeves, one of the state police officers who had questioned me years ago. "Mr. Connor," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." I sat down, curiosity and apprehension warring within me. "What's this about, detective?" Reeves leaned forward, his expression serious. "We've reopened the investigation into Emily Parker's death." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What? Why?" Linda and I confessed. "We're serving our time. New evidence has come to light," Reeves explained. "Evidence that suggests there might have been more to the story than what you and Mrs. Johnson told us." My mind reeled. "I don't understand. We told you everything. What new evidence?" Reeves pulled out a file, sliding a photograph across the table. It showed a stretch of road I recognized all too well, the scene of the accident. But something was off. This photo was taken by a traffic camera about 2 minutes before the estimated time of Emily Parker's death, Reeves said. "Looked closely, appeared at the image, and suddenly I saw it. There, in the background, was a Ford car. Car I didn't remember seeing that night. We've enhanced the image," Reeves continued. "The license plate is partially visible. We've traced it to a Thomas Grayson. Does that name mean anything to you?" I shook my head, still struggling to process this new information. "No, I've never heard of him. Are you saying someone else was involved?" Reeves leaned back, his eyes never leaving my face. "That's what we're trying to figure out, Mr. Connor. We've spoken to Mrs. Johnson as well. She claims no knowledge of this Ford car or Mr. Grayson. But given the history of deception in this case," he left the sentence hanging, the implication clear. "They weren't sure if they could trust our word anymore." "I swear," I said, my voice shaking, "I'm not lying. If there was another car there that night, I don't remember it. Unless," a terrible thought occurred to me. "The drug," I whispered. "The one Linda gave me to make me forget. Could it have made me forget more than just her presence?" Reeves nodded slowly. "It's possible, which is why we're here, Mr. Connor. We need your help. We need you to try and remember anything at all, that might shed light on this new development." As Reeves left, promising to return in a few days, my mind was in turmoil. The whispers from the night before suddenly took on new meaning. "The truth has many layers," it had said. Was this what it meant? Over the next few days, I threw myself into trying to recover any lost memories. I meditated, I wrote down every fragment I could recall from that night. I even requested sessions with the prison psychologist to try hypnotherapy. Slowly, maddeningly slowly, pieces began to come back. Flashes of memory, snippets of conversation I'd forgotten. I remembered an argument not just between Linda and me, but involving a third voice. A man's voice, angry and threatening. I remembered the screech of tires, not just from our car, but from another, speeding away from the scene. And I remembered a name, whispered urgently by Linda just before she drugged me. "We can't tell anyone about Tom. He'll kill us both." As these memories surfaced, I felt a growing sense of horror. What really happened that night? Who is Tom Grayson? And what role did he play in Emily's death? When Detective Reeves returned, I told him everything I'd remembered. His face grew increasingly grim as I spoke. "Mr. Connor," he said when I'd finished, "I believe you've just blown this case wide open. We'll need to bring Mrs. Johnson in for further questioning, and we'll be looking into this Tom Grayson very closely." As he stood to leave, Reeves paused. "You know, this could potentially affect your sentence. If it turns out you weren't as directly responsible as we thought." I shook my head. "That doesn't matter. What matters is finding out the whole truth, for Emily's sake and for her family." That night, as I lay in my bunk, my mind racing with the implications of these new revelations, I heard the whisper one last time. "Well done, Jake. You're closer to the truth now than ever before. But remember, the journey isn't over. True redemption lies not just in uncovering the past, but in what you do with that knowledge." As the whisper faded, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever the truth turned out to be, whatever consequences it might bring, I knew one thing for certain. I would see this through to the end. For Emily, for her family, and for the man I was trying to become. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with potential dangers and revelations. But for the first time in years, I felt ready to face whatever came next. The truth, in all its complexity, was finally within reach. The gates of the prison loomed before me, a sight I'd seen countless times over the past 5 years. But today was different. Today they were opening to let me out. My early release, granted due to the new evidence in Emily's case and my cooperation with the ongoing investigation, felt surreal. As I stepped out into the crisp autumn air, a free man for the first time in half a decade, I was overwhelmed by a mixture of emotions: relief, anxiety, and a deep-seated determination to see this through to the end. Kate was waiting for me, her face a mix of joy and concern. As she hugged me tightly, I felt a lump form in my throat. "Welcome back, middle brother," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The drive back to my old neighborhood was quiet, both of us lost in our thoughts. As we turned onto the familiar street, I saw it, my old house, the scene of so many nightmares and whispered truths. "Are you sure about this, Jake?" Kate asked, concern evident in her voice. "You don't have to go back there. We could find you a place in the city, near me." I shook my head, my resolve firm. "No, I need to do this. I need to face it all, the memories, the truth, whatever's left to uncover." As we pulled into the driveway, I saw a figure standing near the old well. My heart raced as I recognized him, Mr. Parker, Emily's father. I approached him slowly, unsure of my welcome. His face was a mask of complex emotions: grief, anger, and something else I couldn't quite identify. "Mr. Parker," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I didn't expect to see you here." He nodded, his eyes never leaving my face. "I heard you were being released today. I needed to see you, to talk to you face to face." Sensing the intensity of the moment, quietly excused herself and went inside the house. Mr. Parker and I stood in silence for a moment, the weight of our shared history hanging heavy between us. Finally, he spoke. "I've been following the investigation, Jake. This man, Tom Grayson, they found him." My breath caught in my throat. "They did? When?" "Last week," Mr. Parker replied. "He confessed to everything. It turns out he was blackmailing Linda, threatening to expose your affair if she didn't help him cover up his own involvement in the accident." The world seemed to tilt around me as the implications of this revelation sank in. "So that night," Mr. Parker nodded, his voice tight with emotion. "Grayson was drunk, driving recklessly. He hit Emily first, then swerved into your lane, causing you to hit her as well. He used his connections to bury the evidence, and used Linda's fear to keep you both quiet." I felt my knees give way, sinking to the ground as the full truth finally came to light. All these years, all the guilt and self-recrimination, and we hadn't even known the whole story. "I'm so sorry," I choked out, tears streaming down my face. "If I had just remembered sooner, if I hadn't let Linda drug me." To my utter shock, Mr. Parker knelt beside me, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Jake, listen to me. What happened that night was a tragedy, a terrible confluence of bad decisions and worse luck. But you've paid for your part in it. You've worked to make amends. And in the end, it was your willingness to keep searching for the truth that brought Grayson to justice." I looked up at him, hardly daring to believe what I was hearing. How can you be so understanding? After everything that's happened?" Mr. Parker's eyes filled with tears. "Because Emily would have wanted me to be. Because holding on to anger and blame hasn't brought her back, hasn't made anything better." And because I've seen the man you've become, Jake. The work you've done in prison, the lives you've touched through your literacy program, that matters. As we sat there, the autumn sun warming our faces, I felt a shift in the air. A whisper, so faint I almost missed it. The circle is complete, Cenk. The truth is known. But your journey isn't over. It's just beginning. Mr. Parker looked around, startled. Did you hear that? I nodded, a small smile tugging at my lips despite the emotional weight of the moment. It's a long story, Mr. Parker. One I'm only now beginning to fully understand myself. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard, Mr. Parker and I talked. Really talked for the first time. About Emily, about the night that changed all our lives, about the years that followed. It was painful, but also cathartic, like lancing a long festering wound. As he prepared to leave, Mr. Parker turned to me one last time. Jake, I want you to know, I forgive you. It's taken me years to get to this point, but I do. And I think Emily would be proud of the man you're becoming. Those words, more than anything else, broke something open inside me. As Mr. Parker drove away, I wept not just for Emily, or for the years lost, but for the possibility of redemption I'd never truly believed was possible. That night, as I lay in my old bedroom, surrounded by memories both painful and bittersweet, I heard the whisper one last time. You've come full circle, Jake. You've faced your past, uncovered the truth, and found forgiveness. But remember, this is not the end. It's a new beginning. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I called Detective Reeves. Detective, I said when he answered, I want to help with the Grayson case in any way I can, and after that, I want to expand the literacy program, not just in prisons but in schools, in community centers. I want to honor Emily's memory by continuing the work she was passionate about. Reeves was quiet for a moment. That's a big undertaking, Jake. Are you sure you're ready for it? I thought about everything that had happened, the accident, the years of guilt, the revelations, and finally, the forgiveness I'd never thought possible. Yes, I said, my voice firm with conviction. I'm ready. As I hung up the phone, I walked out to the old well. It stood silent in the morning light, no whispers emanating from its depths. But I didn't need them anymore. The well had guided me to this point, had pushed me to uncover the truth and face my past. Now it was up to me to shape my future. I placed my hand on the cold stone, feeling a sense of closure. Thank you, I whispered, not sure if I was talking to the well, to Emily's spirit, or to some greater force I didn't fully understand. As I turned back to the house, ready to start this new chapter of my life, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with obstacles and setbacks, but for the first time I felt truly prepared to face it. The old well in my backyard had started whispering my darkest secrets at night, but in doing so, it had led me to confront those secrets, to uncover deeper truths, and ultimately to find a path to redemption. My journey had come full circle, and now a new one was just beginning.